The photograph appeared for exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds that would shatter the carefully constructed walls between the most powerful woman in the building and the man everyone overlooked. Victoria Hale didn't make mistakes. She built empires, crushed competitors, and commanded rooms with a single glance. But on a Tuesday morning in November, her private screen betrayed her humanity to the one person who had nothing to lose by seeing it. Ethan Cole had spent 5 years being invisible. It was safer that way. Easier. But when the CEO's ice-blue eyes locked onto his across her executive desk, demanding an answer to a question no one had ever dared ask her, invisibility was no longer an option. Some moments don't ask for permission. They simply arrive and change everything. Before we dive into this story, I want to invite you on this journey with me. If you enjoy what you're about to hear, please hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The server crash happened at 9:47 a.m. Ethan Cole was 3 bites into a lukewarm breakfast burrito when his phone buzzed with the kind of urgency that meant someone important was having a very bad morning. He set down the burrito, wiped his hands on his jeans, and read the message from his supervisor. Executive floor. Victoria Hale's office. System down. Now. He stood in the break room of DataCore Solutions, a mid-sized tech firm occupying floors 12 through 15 of a glass tower in downtown Seattle. Around him, other IT staff continued their morning routines, coffee, complaints, the comfortable rhythm of people who knew their place in the world's machinery. Ethan knew his place too. He was 34 years old, a single father to a 7-year-old daughter named Sophie, and professionally invisible. He fixed computers, reset passwords, and made technology cooperate when it decided to rebel. He didn't attend meetings, he didn't make decisions that affected the company's direction. He certainly didn't interact with executives. Until today. The elevator ride to the 20th floor felt longer than it should have. Ethan checked his reflection in the polished doors. Basic jeans, a company polo shirt, brown hair that needed a trim, and the kind of face that people forgot 5 minutes after meeting him. Exactly as intended. The executive floor was a different world. Where the IT department had fluorescent lights and cubicles, this level had floor-to-ceiling windows, hardwood accents, and the hushed atmosphere of serious money being made. A receptionist with perfect posture and a tablet glanced up as he approached. "Ethan Cole, IT," he said. "I was called about a system issue." She nodded without smiling. "Ms. Hale is expecting you, 3rd door on the right." His stomach tightened. Victoria Hale, the CEO. The woman whose quarterly addresses were delivered with the warmth of a board meeting and the precision of a military briefing. In 5 years at DataCore, Ethan had seen her exactly twice, both times from a distance, moving through the building with an entourage of assistants and executives who seemed to orbit her like anxious planets. He knocked on the door marked with a sleek nameplate, Victoria Hale, Chief Executive Officer. "Come in." The voice was crisp, controlled, and currently edged with irritation. Ethan entered. The office was exactly what he expected. Minimalist, expensive, dominated by a desk that probably cost more than his car. Behind it sat Victoria Hale, 42 years old according to the company website, though she could have passed for younger. Dark hair pulled into a flawless knot, a charcoal suit that suggested both authority and complete indifference to trends, and those distinctive ice-blue eyes that were currently fixed on a laptop screen with the intensity of someone trying to will technology into submission. "It crashed during a video conference with the board," she said without looking up. "Mid-sentence, I need it fixed immediately." "Yes, ma'am." Ethan approached the desk, already mentally running through the most common causes. "May I?" She gestured permission and stood, moving to the window. Even in frustration, her movements were precise, economical. She pulled out her phone and began typing, already moving on to the next crisis while he handled this one. Ethan sat in her chair, an experience that felt vaguely transgressive, and began his diagnostics. The laptop was top of the line, barely 6 months old, and protected by every security protocol the company offered. He checked the event logs, ran a quick hardware scan, and found the culprit, a software conflict between the video conferencing platform and a recent security update. "I can fix this," he said. "It'll take about 10 minutes. I'll need to restart the system." "Do it." Victoria remained at the window, her back to him, phone still in hand. The city spread out below them, gray and glittering under November clouds. Ethan began the repair, his fingers moving through familiar routines. Force close the conflicting applications, clear the cache, initiate a controlled restart. While the system rebooted, he allowed himself a brief glance around the office. Degrees from Harvard and Wharton on the wall. A single photograph of Victoria shaking hands with a senator. Awards for business excellence arranged with the precision of museum pieces. No personal photographs, no plants, no clutter. It was the office of someone who lived entirely in the professional sphere, who had perhaps forgotten, or chosen to forget, that anything else existed. The laptop chimed, beginning its startup sequence, and that's when it happened. As the screen came to life, cycling through its boot sequence, the wallpaper appeared for exactly 3 seconds before the login screen replaced it. 3 seconds. Just long enough for Ethan to see the image clearly. It was Victoria Hale. But not the Victoria Hale everyone knew. In the photograph, she sat on a dock at sunset, feet dangling over water that reflected pink and gold. She wore jeans and a simple white shirt, hair loose around her shoulders, and she was smiling. Not the measured professional smile from corporate photographs, but a genuine, unguarded expression of joy. She looked younger, softer, human. Then the login screen appeared, and the image vanished. Ethan's hand stilled on the keyboard. Behind him, he heard Victoria's footsteps approaching. "Is it fixed?" He should have said yes, should have stood up, collected his things, and returned to the anonymous safety of the IT department. Should have forgotten what he'd seen. Instead, he turned in the chair and found her standing 3 feet away, eyes already scanning the screen to verify his work. "Almost," he said. "Just need to log in and confirm everything's running properly." She moved to the desk, leaning down to enter her password. This close, Ethan could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive, and noticed the fine lines at the corners of her eyes that suggested she smiled less often than she should. The desktop loaded. Her fingers moved efficiently through opening her email, the calendar, the video platform. Everything functioned perfectly. "Good," she said. "Thank you for—" "Where was that photo taken?" The words left Ethan's mouth before his brain could stop them. Victoria froze, her hand still on the mouse. "Excuse me?" Too late to retreat now. "The wallpaper," he said quietly. "The photo of you on the dock. I saw it during the reboot. It looked peaceful." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 5 degrees. Victoria straightened, her expression shifting into something unreadable. For a long moment she said nothing, and Ethan became acutely aware that he'd just crossed a line that probably dozens of company policies existed to prevent. Then she did something unexpected. She sat down in the chair across from her own desk, the chair where visitors sat, where people came to be evaluated and judged. She folded her hands in her lap and studied him with an intensity that made him wish he could disappear entirely. "In 5 years," she said slowly, "you're the first person in this building to ask me a question that wasn't about business." Ethan's throat went dry. "I apologize. I shouldn't have—" "Answer me honestly." Her voice cut through his retreat. "What did you think when you saw it?" The question hung between them, dangerous and intimate. Ethan could feel his pulse in his temples. Every instinct screamed to deflect, to apologize again, to escape this conversation that felt like standing on the edge of something he didn't understand. But Victoria Hale was looking at him with an expression he'd never seen on her face before. Not anger, not impatience, curiosity. "I thought," he said carefully, "that you looked real." "Real?" She repeated the word as if tasting it. "As opposed to?" "Powerful," he said. "Untouchable. The way everyone sees you here." Something flickered in her eyes. "And you don't find power real?" "I find it lonely." The words emerged from somewhere deeper than professional caution, from the part of Ethan that understood solitude intimately. He was a single father who'd lost his wife to cancer 3 years ago, who spent his evenings helping with homework and his weekends at soccer games, who existed in a world that had narrowed to survival and his daughter's happiness. He knew what it meant to build walls around yourself to keep functioning. Victoria's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted. She looked away toward the window where Seattle spread out in all its industrial beauty. Lake Wenatchee, she said quietly. The photo was taken at a cabin my family owned. I haven't been back in 8 years. Ethan waited. Some moments demanded silence. I keep it as my wallpaper, she continued, because it reminds me that I used to be someone who could sit on a dock and watch the sunset without checking my phone. A brief, humorless smile touched her lips. Clearly, I've failed at that. You built something, Ethan said. That requires sacrifice. Is that admiration or pity? Neither, just observation. Victoria turned back to him, and for the first time since he'd entered her office, Ethan felt like she was truly seeing him, not as a technician, not as an employee, but as another person navigating the complicated terrain of being alive. You have a daughter, she said. The statement caught him off guard. How did you... Your personnel file crossed my desk last month. We're implementing new retention policies. Single parent, consistent performance reviews, never late, never calls in sick. She tilted her head slightly. You're invisible by choice, aren't you? Now it was Ethan's turn to feel exposed. It's easier, less complicated. For whom? For Sophie, my daughter. She's 7. She needs stability, not a father who's trying to climb corporate ladders or impress executives. He met Victoria's gaze steadily. I learned a long time ago that ambition and survival don't always coexist well. And yet you risked telling me the truth just now. You asked for it. People rarely give me what I ask for. They give me what they think I want to hear. Victoria stood, moving back to her desk. She touched her laptop screen lightly, where the login screen still glowed. 8 years since I've been to that cabin. Do you know why I stopped going? Ethan shook his head. Because I decided that person, the woman in that photograph, was weak, sentimental, an obstacle to what I needed to become. She looked at him with an expression that might have been regret or defiance, or both. I built Datacore from a failing startup into a company worth $300 million. I made decisions that put hundreds of people out of work and saved thousands of jobs. I stood in boardrooms where I was the only woman and demanded respect until I got it. And somewhere along the way, I forgot how to sit on a dock and do nothing. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and unexpected. Success has a cost, Ethan said quietly. My wife used to say that, before she died. Victoria's expression softened almost imperceptibly. I'm sorry. Don't be. She was right. He stood, recognizing that this conversation had drifted far beyond the bounds of a simple repair call. Your system's fixed. If you have any other issues, wait. He paused, hand on his laptop bag. Victoria was watching him with that same intense focus, but now there was something else in her expression, a kind of calculation that made him nervous. You said something earlier, she began slowly, about power being lonely. You were right. She crossed her arms, a gesture that seemed almost offensive. I have 1,700 employees, dozens of executives who report to me, a board that trusts my judgment, and I don't have a single person in my life who would tell me the truth if I asked for it. That's not entirely true, Ethan said. You have 1,700 people who would tell you the truth. You've just trained them not to. The corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile. You're either very brave or very foolish. I'm a single father with no career ambitions. That makes me dangerous to exactly no one, or the perfect person to ask uncomfortable questions. Victoria seemed to come to a decision. She pulled out a business card, heavy stock, minimalist design, and wrote something on the back. I'm starting a confidential project, internal assessment of company culture, employee satisfaction, systemic inefficiencies. I need people who understand how this place actually works, not how the executives think it works. She held out the card. Ethan took it automatically, glancing at what she'd written. Thursday, 6 p.m. 20th floor conference room C. I don't understand, he said. You see things other people miss because you've chosen to be invisible. That makes you valuable. Victoria's tone was crisp now, professional. I'm assembling a small team, cross-department, people who know the truth about this company, the problems we ignore, the inefficiencies we've normalized, the ways we've failed our employees. You want me to criticize the company? To executives? I want you to be honest. The same way you were honest about that photograph. She gestured toward the laptop. I've spent 8 years building walls. I think it's time to find out what they're hiding. Ethan looked at the card in his hand, then back at Victoria. Why me? You don't know me. No, she agreed. But in 10 minutes, you managed to see me more clearly than people I've worked with for years. That's worth exploring. It was a test, Ethan realized, or maybe a gamble. Either way, it was the kind of opportunity that could change everything, for better or worse. I'll think about it, he said. Don't think too long. Thursday is in 2 days. Victoria returned to her desk, her posture shifting back into CEO mode, shoulders square, expression neutral, walls rebuilding in real time. You can go. And Ethan? He paused at the door. Thank you for fixing the system, and for answering my question. Walking back to the elevator, Ethan felt the weight of the business card in his pocket like a small grenade. Victoria Hale had just offered him a door out of invisibility. The question was whether opening it would lead somewhere worth going, or somewhere that would destroy the careful, safe life he'd built for Sophie and himself. The elevator descended, carrying him back to the familiar territory of the IT department, where problems had solutions and people stayed in their designated roles. But even as he returned to his desk, to the half-eaten burrito and the queue of routine repair tickets, Ethan couldn't shake the image of that photograph. Victoria on the dock, feet in the water, smiling at a sunset. A woman who'd chosen power over peace and was only now beginning to wonder if the trade had been worth it. That evening, Ethan picked up Sophie from her after-school program at 6:15, exactly on schedule. She bounded out wearing her purple backpack and a gap-toothed grin, already talking before she'd fully reached him. Dad! We made volcanoes today with baking soda and vinegar, and mine exploded everywhere, and Mrs. Peterson said it was the biggest eruption in class history. Slow down, kiddo. Ethan caught her in a hug, breathing in the scent of craft supplies and childhood enthusiasm. Let's get to the car before you give me the full scientific report. In the car, Sophie continued her detailed reconstruction of the day's events, while Ethan navigated Seattle's early evening traffic. This was his favorite part of the day, the transition between work and home, when Sophie's presence pulled him fully into the present and away from whatever complications the adult world had thrown at him. Dad? Sophie asked as they pulled into their apartment complex. Are you listening? Volcanoes, major eruption. Mrs. Peterson was impressed. That was 5 minutes ago. I'm talking about the field trip now, the one to the Science Museum. Can I go? Can I? Ethan parked and turned to face her. When is it? Next Friday. We need to bring $20 for admission and lunch. Sophie's expression turned serious, the way it did when she was trying to gauge whether something was too expensive. At 7, she already understood more about budgets than most kids her age. Of course you can go, Ethan said, making a mental note to shift some money around. $20 wasn't much, but it was always something. We'll get you signed up tonight. Relief flooded Sophie's face. Thanks, Dad. Inside their small 2-bedroom apartment, the evening followed its familiar pattern. Homework at the kitchen table while Ethan made dinner, spaghetti tonight, with garlic bread from the freezer. Sophie struggling with math problems that seemed designed to confuse rather than educate. Ethan explaining fractions using pizza slices until the concept clicked, and Sophie's face lit up with understanding. Bath time. Story time. The careful ritual of tucking her in with her favorite stuffed bear, Mr. Buttons, a gift from her mother before the cancer had stolen her away. Mom would have liked the volcano, Sophie said drowsily. She loved messy science. She really did, Ethan agreed, smoothing her hair back. She would have been so proud of you. After Sophie fell asleep, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with a beer he didn't really want, and the business card Victoria Hale had given him. Thursday, 6 p.m. Conference room C. He thought about Victoria's question. You're invisible by choice, aren't you? Yes, absolutely yes. When Sarah died, Ethan had made a conscious decision to prioritize stability over advancement. He'd turned down promotions that would have required travel or longer hours. He'd stopped networking, stopped positioning himself for career growth, stopped being ambitious about anything except being present for his daughter. It wasn't martyrdom, it was survival. Sophie needed a parent who showed up, to soccer games and school events and bedtime routines. She needed consistency in a world that had already proven itself capable of devastating loss. Everything else was negotiable. But Victoria's offer wasn't just about career advancement, it was about truth. About pulling back the curtain on systems that didn't work and problems everyone pretended not to see. Ethan had spent 5 years watching DataCore from the invisible margins, seeing things that executives missed because they were too insulated by hierarchy and assumption. He knew which departments were chronically understaffed. He knew which managers created toxic cultures and which ones actually gave a damn. He knew where money was wasted and where it was desperately needed. He knew because invisible people saw everything. They just rarely got asked to speak. Victoria was asking. Ethan picked up his phone and typed a message to his supervisor. Need to leave an hour early Thursday. Can make up the time Friday. Let me know if that works. The response came within minutes. No problem. Everything okay? Just a meeting. Nothing urgent. He sent the message and set down the phone, feeling like he'd just made a decision without quite meaning to. Thursday, 6 p.m. He'd go. He'd listen to what Victoria had to say. He'd decide then whether this was an opportunity worth the risk. But as he got ready for bed, moving through his own nighttime routine in the quiet apartment, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the decision had already been made the moment he told Victoria the truth about her photograph. Some doors, once opened, couldn't be closed again. Yeah. Thursday arrived with the kind of gray drizzle that made Seattle feel like it was wrapped in wet flannel. Ethan arranged for Sophie to stay an extra hour at her after-school program, citing a work obligation that was technically true, if not entirely complete. She accepted this with the easy trust of a child who'd never been let down, making him promise to pick her up by 7:30. At 5:55 p.m., Ethan stood outside conference room C on the 20th floor, straightening his shirt and wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake. The door was slightly ajar. He could hear voices inside, low, professional, the sound of people being carefully polite with each other. He recognized the cadence of corporate interaction, the subtle dance of hierarchy and caution. He pushed the door open. The conference room was smaller than he expected, designed for intimate meetings rather than large presentations. A table that seated 10, a wall of windows showing the city lights beginning to glow against the darkening sky. And seated around the table, 5 people who all looked as uncertain as Ethan felt. Victoria sat at the head of the table, dressed more casually than he'd ever seen her, black slacks and a simple gray sweater that made her look less like a CEO and more like a very competent graduate professor. She glanced up as he entered, and something in her expression relaxed. Ethan? Good. That's everyone. She gestured to an empty chair. Please, sit. Ethan took stock of the room as he settled in. He recognized 2 of the faces. Marcus Chen from accounting, a quiet man in his 50s who always seemed faintly exhausted, and Jennifer Walsh from HR, mid-30s, and wearing the kind of cautiously professional demeanor that suggested she was very good at not saying what she actually thought. The other 2 were strangers. A young black woman with vibrant braids and an artist vibe. She looked too creative for corporate America. And an older white man with the weathered face of someone who worked with his hands, wearing a maintenance uniform. Let me introduce everyone, Victoria said. Marcus Chen, senior accountant. Jennifer Walsh, HR compliance. Keisha Williams, senior designer from our creative department. Robert Kowalski, facilities management supervisor. She gestured to Ethan. And Ethan Cole, IT. The group exchanged cautious nods. You're all wondering why you're here, Victoria continued. The official answer is that I'm conducting an internal review of company operations. The real answer is that I'm trying to understand how DataCore actually functions, as opposed to how the quarterly reports suggest it functions. She stood and moved to the windows, her reflection ghosting against the glass. Each of you was chosen because you occupy a unique position in this company. You see things I don't see. You hear things that never make it to the executive floor. You understand problems that exist below the level of visibility we operate on. She turned back to face them. I'm not interested in flattery or corporate diplomacy. I'm interested in truth. The silence that followed was heavy with skepticism. Ethan watched the others exchange glances, weighing risk against opportunity, wondering if this was genuine or some elaborate test. It was Marcus who spoke first, his voice dry and measured. With respect, Mrs. Hale, people don't generally get rewarded for telling executives uncomfortable truths. You're right, Victoria said, which is why I'm going to be very clear about what this is and isn't. This isn't an official committee. There will be no minutes, no formal record. Anything discussed in this room stays in this room. You're not representatives of your departments. You're individuals I've asked to help me see clearly. And if we choose not to participate, Jennifer asked carefully, then you leave, and we never speak of this again. No consequences. No judgment. Victoria's expression was steady, sincere. But if you stay, I need your honesty, complete honesty, about what's broken, what's working, and what we're all pretending not to see. Keisha leaned forward, her jewelry catching the light. Why now? Datacor's been operating the same way for years. Because I looked at a photograph of myself, Victoria said simply, and realized I'd become someone I didn't recognize. Someone who'd built walls so high that I can't see what's actually happening in my own company. She sat back down, meeting each person's eyes in turn. I'm asking for help tearing those walls down. The vulnerability in her admission seemed to shift something in the room. Robert, the facilities supervisor, cleared his throat. I've got 20 years in building maintenance, he said, his voice rough with years of use. Worked at 3 companies before this one. And I'll tell you straight, Datacor treats its support staff like furniture. We're invisible until something breaks. Then we're blamed for not being psychic about problems we're never told about. Victoria nodded, pulling out a tablet and making notes. Give me specifics. HVAC system on floor 14 has needed replacement for 3 years. We submit reports every quarter. Nothing happens because it's not a sexy expense. Meanwhile, people are working in rooms that hit 85 degrees in summer. Productivity drops, morale tanks. But hey, we saved money on infrastructure. Jennifer, Victoria said, turning to the HR specialist, you're being quiet. Jennifer hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. We have a sexual harassment problem in the sales department. Not one case, a pattern. Junior saleswomen being pressured by senior managers. I've documented 6 incidents in the past 18 months. Each time, HR is overruled by department heads who don't want to lose their top performers. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Victoria's expression hardened. Names. I can't. This room is confidential, remember? Names. Jennifer swallowed hard, then pulled out her phone and began reading from notes. 3 names. All senior executives, all protected by the kind of institutional power that made careers untouchable. Victoria's jaw tightened, but she simply nodded and made more notes. What else? And like a dam breaking, the truth came pouring out. Marcus described accounting practices that were technically legal but morally questionable, ways the company shifted expenses to make quarterly numbers look better while chronically underfunding essential departments. Keisha talked about the creative team's burnout, how designers were expected to produce award-winning work on impossible deadlines while being paid below market rate and told to be grateful for the opportunity. Robert detailed deferred maintenance across the building, safety issues that had been documented and ignored, cleaning staff working without adequate supplies because someone decided to cut costs by 15% without consulting anyone who actually did the work. Through it all, Victoria listened. She asked questions, she took notes, and she didn't make excuses. Ethan found himself watching her with growing respect. This was a different person than the CEO who commanded boardrooms. This was someone genuinely trying to understand the machinery she'd built and the ways it was hurting people. Ethan, Victoria said, pulling his attention back, you've been quiet. He'd been waiting for this, measuring his words, deciding how much truth was safe to speak. But then he thought about Victoria's photograph, about the woman on the dock who disappeared into the machinery of power. About the question she'd asked him, what did you think when you saw it? She'd wanted truth then. She deserved it now. I think, Ethan said slowly, that Datacor runs on the assumption that some people matter more than others. Not officially. No one would say it out loud. But it's built into every system, every decision, every budget allocation. He looked around the table at the others. Marcus in his off-the-rack suit, Jennifer with her careful corporate armor, Keisha's creative energy barely contained by professional norms, Robert's work-worn hands resting on the table. We're all replaceable, Ethan continued. That's the message. Executives make choices that affect hundreds of lives, And if those choices hurt people on the lower floors, well, that's just the cost of business. Robert's maintenance crew works in dangerous conditions, but they're not the ones making six figures. So who cares? Jennifer documents harassment, but the harassers bring in revenue, so they're protected. Marcus sees financial manipulation, but he's just an accountant, so his concerns get filed away. He met Victoria's eyes. You asked why I'm invisible by choice. This is why. Because I learned that the higher you climb, the less you're allowed to see. And I'd rather see clearly from the bottom than be blind at the top. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Victoria smiled, not a corporate smile, but something genuine and perhaps a little sad. Thank you, she said quietly. That's exactly the kind of honesty I need. She stood and moved to the whiteboard at the end of the room, marker in hand. Here's what happens next, she said, beginning to write. We meet every Thursday, same time, same room. We document everything, every problem, every failure, every systemic issue. Then we prioritize. We start with the things that are hurting people the most, and we fix them. Just like that? Marcus asked skeptically. No, not just like that. This will be complicated and political, and will probably make me very unpopular with my own executive team. Victoria turned back to face them. But I didn't build this company to create a machine that grinds people down, and if that's what it's become, then it's my responsibility to fix it. Even if it costs you, Keisha asked, especially if it costs me. The meeting ran until 7:15. By the time Ethan left, his head was spinning with the scope of what Victoria was proposing. This wasn't a minor restructuring. This was a fundamental rethinking of how DataCore operated, its priorities, its values, its treatment of the people who actually made it function. It was ambitious, maybe impossible. But as Ethan drove to pick up Sophie, he couldn't shake the feeling that something important had shifted. Victoria Hale had looked at her own photograph and realized she'd lost something essential. And instead of accepting that loss, she'd decided to fight for it. Maybe, Ethan thought, that was what courage actually looked like. Not fearlessness, just the willingness to acknowledge what was broken and try to fix it, even when the cost was high. Sophie was waiting outside her program when he pulled up, bouncing with the energy of a child who'd been promised a visit to her favorite ice cream shop if she finished all her homework. Did you finish? Ethan asked as she climbed into the car. All of it. Even the hard math. Can we go now? We can go now. As they drove toward the ice cream shop, Sophie chattered about her day, her friends, her plans for the weekend. And Ethan listened, grateful for this simple joy, this uncomplicated love that anchored him to what mattered most. But in the back of his mind, he was already thinking about next Thursday, about the work ahead, about the truth they'd begun to uncover and the changes Victoria was determined to make. For the first time in 3 years, Ethan Cole felt like he was part of something larger than survival. It was terrifying. It was also, he realized, exactly what he needed. The ice cream shop was nearly empty when they arrived. Just a tired barista wiping down tables and soft jazz playing through overhead speakers. Sophie ordered her usual, mint chocolate chip with rainbow sprinkles, and Ethan got black coffee, which earned him a look of profound disappointment from his daughter. Dad, you're at an ice cream shop. You're supposed to get ice cream. I'm getting warmth and caffeine. That's better than ice cream. That's absolutely not true. Sophie took an enthusiastic bite that left green smudges at the corners of her mouth. Ice cream is scientifically proven to be the best food. Scientifically proven by whom? By me. Just now. I'm a scientist. Ethan smiled, watching her attack the cone with the single-minded focus only children could achieve. This was the simplicity he'd been protecting for 3 years. No complications, no risks, just homework and ice cream and the comfortable rhythm of being exactly where he needed to be. But sitting there in the fluorescent glow, his phone buzzed with an email from Victoria Hale. Subject line: Thursday follow-up. He didn't open it, not yet. Sophie deserved his full attention, and whatever Victoria had written could wait until after bedtime, after story time, after the sacred routine that kept their small world functioning. Later, though, after Sophie was asleep with Mr. Buttons tucked firmly under one arm, Ethan sat on his couch and opened the email. The message was brief, direct, pure Victoria. Thank you for your honesty tonight. Attached is a draft outline of priority issues based on our discussion. Review and add anything I missed. Also, I need someone who understands the IT infrastructure to assess our data security practices. Willing to take that on? VH. The attachment was 3 pages of meticulously organized notes. HVAC repairs on floor 14, HR policy review for harassment protocols, creative department workload analysis, accounting transparency audit, each item tagged with department, estimated cost, and implementation timeline. At the bottom, in a section labeled Systemic Issues, Victoria had written, "Company culture assumes replaceability of lower-level staff. This assumption drives decision-making at every level." Question: how do we rebuild from a foundation of dignity rather than efficiency? Ethan read that line 3 times. Most executives would have focused on metrics, productivity, bottom-line impact. Victoria was asking a fundamentally different question. Not how do we make the machine run better, but what kind of machine should we be building in the first place? He typed a response. "I'll review the security practices. Give me a week for a full assessment. And you didn't miss anything in the outline, but I'd add employee feedback mechanisms. Right now, there's no safe way for people to report problems without risking retaliation." He hit send before he could second-guess himself, then closed the laptop and sat in the quiet of his living room, listening to the building settle around him. His phone buzzed almost immediately. Another email from Victoria, sent at 11:47 p.m. "Good point. Let's discuss Tuesday. My office, 6 p.m.? Ethan stared at the message. Tuesday meant another late evening, another reshuffling of Sophie's schedule, another step deeper into territory that felt increasingly complicated. But he typed back anyway. "I'll be there." The weekend passed in its usual pattern. Saturday morning soccer games where Sophie played defense with enthusiastic incompetence and Ethan cheered from the sidelines with other parents who'd mastered the art of supportive neutrality. Grocery shopping, laundry, the mundane architecture of single parenthood. Sunday afternoon, Sophie had a playdate with her best friend Emma, which gave Ethan 3 unexpected hours of solitude. He spent them doing what he'd promised Victoria, conducting a quiet audit of DataCore's security infrastructure from his personal laptop, accessing systems with his admin credentials, and looking for the kind of vulnerabilities that most IT departments either didn't notice or chose to ignore. What he found was both impressive and troubling. DataCore's external security was solid. Firewalls, encryption, multi-factor authentication, all standard best practices. But internal security was a different story. Access controls were inconsistent. Sensitive financial data was available to far more people than necessary. Password policies were theoretically strict but practically unenforced. And most concerning, there were no meaningful audit trails for who accessed what information and when. It was the kind of security posture that looked good on paper but fell apart under scrutiny. The digital equivalent of a house with excellent locks on the front door and windows left open around back. Ethan documented everything, building a report that grew more damning with each page. By the time he picked up Sophie from Emma's house, he had 17 pages of findings and recommendations that would probably make several department heads very uncomfortable. Monday at work, Ethan moved through his regular routine with half his attention, while his mind churned through the implications of what he was uncovering. He fixed a printer jam on floor 9, reset passwords for 3 people who'd forgotten them over the weekend, helped a junior developer troubleshoot a database connection issue. Invisible work, essential work, the kind of work that kept the company functioning but never showed up in quarterly presentations. At lunch, Marcus from accounting appeared in the IT break room, looking uncomfortable in the way people did when they were about to ask for something outside normal channels. "Ethan, got a minute?" They found an empty conference room, and Marcus closed the door with the careful deliberation of someone who'd spent decades learning when to be cautious. "About Thursday," Marcus said, "what Victoria's trying to do. You think she's serious?" "I think she's serious about wanting to know the truth. Whether she can actually change anything." Ethan shrugged. "That's a different question. I've been at this company for 12 years. I've seen 3 CEOs, 4 reorganizations, and more initiatives than I can count. They all start with the best intentions." Marcus sat heavily in a chair. "And they all end the same way. The people at the top protect their own, the people at the bottom get told to be grateful they have jobs, and nothing fundamentally changes. So why did you come to the meeting?" "Same reason you did, I imagine. Because for once, someone in power was asking instead of telling. Marcus rubbed his face tiredly. I've got 2 kids in college. I need this job. But I also need to be able to look at myself in the mirror. Those harassment cases Jennifer mentioned? I know one of the women. She's 26 years old, brilliant with numbers, and she's thinking about quitting because some executive twice her age thinks his position gives him rights to her attention. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. Did she report it? 3 times. Nothing happened. The guy's still there, still doing it, and she's still wondering if she should just find another job rather than keep fighting. Marcus met Ethan's eyes. So yeah, I'm cynical. But I'm also hoping Victoria actually means what she says, because if she doesn't, we just put targets on our backs for nothing. The weight of that truth settled between them. They weren't just sharing observations in those Thursday meetings. They were taking real risks, career risks, financial risks, the kind that could have consequences far beyond corporate politics. For what it's worth, Ethan said, I think Victoria knows exactly what she's asking us to risk. And I think she's willing to risk just as much herself. I hope you're right. Marcus stood straightening his tie. Because if you're wrong, we're all going to pay for this honesty. After Marcus left, Ethan sat alone in the conference room, thinking about the young accountant who'd reported harassment 3 times and been ignored. Thinking about all the other people in the building who'd tried to speak up and been told, directly or indirectly, that their concerns didn't matter as much as quarterly profits or executive comfort. That evening, getting Sophie ready for bed, he found himself distracted by the weight of what he was learning. Not just about DataCore, but about the machinery of corporate life itself. How good people could build systems that hurt other good people, not through malice, but through the slow accumulation of choices made for efficiency, for profit, for the path of least resistance. Dad, you're not listening again. Sophie's voice pulled him back to the present. I asked you 3 times if we can get a dog. Sorry, kiddo. What about a dog? Emma has a dog. His name is Biscuit, and he's fluffy, and he does tricks, and she says he sleeps on her bed and makes her feel safe. Sophie looked at him with the kind of hope that made his heart hurt. Could we get a dog? Please? Ethan thought about their small apartment, his unpredictable schedule, the cost of vet bills and food, and everything else that came with pet ownership. All the practical reasons to say no. But he also thought about Sophie sleeping alone in her room, about the stuffed bear she still held because it smelled like her mother, about the ways a 7-year-old carried grief without the words to express it. Tell you what, he said, let's do some research. Find out what kind of dogs are good for apartments, how much they cost to take care of, what kind of responsibilities you'd have. If we can make it work, we'll seriously think about it. Sophie's face lit up like he'd just promised her the moon. Really? You mean it? I mean, we'll research it. No promises beyond that. She threw her arms around his neck with the full force of childhood enthusiasm. You're the best dad ever. The best. Later, lying in his own bed staring at the ceiling, Ethan thought about promises and responsibility, about the difference between what we want to give the people we love and what we can actually provide, about the constant negotiation between safety and possibility. His phone buzzed. Another late-night email from Victoria. Forgot to mention, bring your security assessment Tuesday. Want to discuss before Thursday's meeting. He typed back. Will do. How late are you working? The response came immediately. Does it matter? The work doesn't care what time it is. Ethan frowned at the screen, then typed, It matters if you're trying not to become the person who forgot how to sit on a dock and do nothing. 3 minutes passed. Then, fair point. Going home now. See you Tuesday. He smiled despite himself. Victoria Hale, CEO, being told when to stop working by an IT technician. 3 weeks ago, that conversation would have been unthinkable. Now it felt almost natural. Tuesday arrived with the kind of autumn rain that turned Seattle into a study in gray tones. Ethan spent the day finishing his security assessment, triple-checking every finding, making sure his recommendations were both thorough and realistic. By 6 p.m., he was standing outside Victoria's office with a thumb drive containing a report that would probably cause problems for people much more powerful than himself. Come in, Victoria called when he knocked. She was standing at her window again, that same position he'd first seen her in 2 weeks ago. But something was different now. Her posture was less rigid, more tired, more human. Coffee? she asked, gesturing to a French press on her desk. I've given up pretending I don't need caffeine to function. Sure, thanks. She poured 2 cups, handed him one, and sat across from him rather than behind her desk. The gesture felt significant, a CEO choosing to meet on equal ground rather than from a position of authority. Your assessment? She asked. Ethan pulled out the thumb drive. 17 pages. The short version is that our external security is excellent and our internal security is barely adequate. We're vulnerable in at least a dozen ways that could be exploited, either by external attackers or internal bad actors. Define barely adequate. Anyone with admin access can view sensitive financial data, personnel files, and strategic documents without leaving any meaningful audit trail. We have no real monitoring of who's accessing what information, and our password policies are theoretical rather than enforced. Victoria's expression darkened as she skimmed through the report on her laptop. How long has it been like this? Years. It's not malicious. It's accumulated neglect. Every department wanted easy access to the information they needed, so exceptions got made. Those exceptions became standard practice, and nobody stepped back to ask whether we'd created massive security holes in the name of convenience. Can it be fixed? Yes, but it'll be expensive and politically complicated. You'll need to restrict access across the board, implement new monitoring systems, and enforce policies that will make a lot of people angry because they're used to having unrestricted access. Victoria set down her coffee cup with careful precision. Add it to Thursday's agenda. This is exactly the kind of systemic problem we need to address. They spent the next hour going through the details, discussing implementation strategies and timeline. Victoria asked sharp questions, pushed back on anything that seemed vague, and took notes in a leather journal that looked well-worn from use. Around 7:30, Ethan's phone buzzed with a text from the after-school program. Hi, Sophie says you're in a meeting. She's fine here but wanted to make sure you didn't forget. Aw, Sid. Guilt hit him immediately. He'd been so focused on the work that he'd lost track of time. Again. I need to go, he said, standing. I have to pick up my daughter. Victoria glanced at her watch, surprise crossing her features. I didn't realize it was so late. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have kept you. It's fine. She's at her program, but I need to go. Of course. Well, Victoria walked him to the door, then paused. Ethan, can I ask you something personal? He tensed slightly. Sure. How do you balance it? Being present for your daughter and doing work that matters? The question caught him off guard. He thought about all the careful compromises he'd made over 3 years, all the ways he'd chosen Sophie over career advancement, all the nights he'd felt like he was failing at both being a father and being a professional. Honestly, I don't balance it. I choose her every time and accept that it means limiting everything else. He met Victoria's eyes. Why? She looked away, back toward that window where the city lights reflected off rain-slicked glass. Because I'm realizing that I made the opposite choice. I chose the work, every time, and accepted that it meant limiting everything else. And I'm not sure the trade was worth it. The vulnerability in her admission created a moment of understanding between them. Two people who'd made different choices about the same fundamental question of what mattered most. It's not too late, Ethan said quietly, to choose differently. Victoria smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. Isn't it? I'm 42. I've spent 20 years building this career. I don't have a family. I don't have close friends. I have data core and a photograph of a woman I used to be. Then maybe this project, what we're doing on Thursdays, maybe it's not just about fixing the company. Maybe it's about remembering that there are other ways to live. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Maybe. Thank you for the assessment and for the honesty. Again. Driving to pick up Sophie, Ethan thought about Victoria standing in her office at 7:30 on a Tuesday night, surrounded by the evidence of her success and wondering if any of it had been worth the cost. He thought about the choices they'd both made, his to prioritize presence over ambition, hers to prioritize achievement over everything else. Neither path was wrong exactly, but both had costs that weren't always visible until you stopped long enough to notice them. Sophie was in a chatty mood on the drive home, filling him in on every detail of her afternoon, A dispute with another kid over swing privileges, a particularly good grilled cheese sandwich at snack time, new information about dogs she'd learned from a library book. "Did you know," she said seriously, "that golden retrievers are excellent family dogs and very good with children?" "I did know that, actually. And they need exercise, but not too much exercise. And they're very loyal, and they hardly ever bite people." Sophie. And Emma's mom said that having a dog teaches responsibility and helps kids develop empathy, and Sophie. She stopped, looking at him with those eyes that were so much like her mother's, it sometimes hurt to look at them directly. "I said we'd research it," Ethan reminded her gently. "Research doesn't mean we're getting a dog tomorrow. It means we're learning about what it would take." "But we might get one? Eventually? If I'm really responsible and help take care of it and prove I'm ready?" He couldn't say no to that hope. "We might, if we can make it work." "I'll be so responsible, Dad. The most responsible. You won't even recognize how responsible I am." Despite everything, the complicated work situation, the security vulnerabilities, the weight of truth he was helping to uncover, Ethan laughed. Real laughter that came from the simple joy of being Sophie's father and watching her tackle the world with absolute conviction that anything was possible if you just tried hard enough. Thursday's meeting started differently than the first one. There was less hesitation, less testing of boundaries. They'd established a tentative trust, and people came prepared to talk. Robert led with an update on the HVAC situation. He'd received approval for an assessment, not repairs yet, but movement in the right direction. Jennifer had drafted new harassment reporting protocols that bypassed department heads and went straight to an independent review board. Keisha had compiled data on creative department turnover rates that told a story of burnout and undervaluation. Then Victoria turned to Ethan. "Tell them about the security assessment." He walked through the findings, watching their expressions shift from surprise to concern. Marcus looked particularly troubled. "So basically," Marcus said slowly, "anyone with admin access could be looking at confidential financial data without us knowing. Without leaving traces that we actively monitor, yes. That's not just a security problem, that's a compliance nightmare." Marcus pulled out his phone and started typing notes furiously. "If auditors find out we have no meaningful controls on access to sensitive financial information, that's why we're addressing it now," Victoria interrupted firmly, "before it becomes an external problem. Ethan has recommendations for implementation. It'll require budget approval and policy changes across multiple departments." "The executive team won't like it," Jennifer said. "They're used to having access to everything." "Then they'll adjust." Victoria's tone allowed no argument. "This isn't negotiable. We fix it properly or we expose the company to massive liability." The meeting continued for another hour, diving into details and priorities. Toward the end, Keisha raised her hand like a student in class, which made Victoria smile. "You don't need to raise your hand, Keisha. Just speak." "Right, sorry. Old habits." Keisha leaned forward. "I've been thinking about what Ethan said last week, about the company assuming some people are more replaceable than others. And I realized we're all here because we're the replaceable ones, right? We're not executives. We're not decision makers. We're the people who do the actual work while other people take credit for it." "That's accurate," Robert said dryly. "So my question is, what happens when we finish identifying all these problems? Who's actually going to implement the solutions? Because in my experience, the people who benefit from broken systems don't usually volunteer to fix them." The question hung in the air, uncomfortable and important. Victoria set down her pen and looked at each of them in turn. "That's a fair question, and the honest answer is, I don't know yet. I have the authority to make some changes unilaterally. Others will require executive buy-in or board approval. Some will be easy, others will be fights." "And if you lose those fights?" Marcus asked. "Then I lose them publicly and on record, so everyone knows the truth about what we tried to do and who blocked it." Victoria's expression was calm but determined. "I'm not interested in quiet compromises anymore. If this company won't treat its people with dignity, I want that choice to be visible." Ethan felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't just about fixing problems. This was about accountability. About making power answer for its choices rather than hiding behind corporate neutrality. "There's something else we need to talk about," Jennifer said quietly. "The harassment cases I mentioned. I compiled a full report, not just the recent ones, but going back 5 years. There's a pattern. Multiple women reporting the same behaviors from the same executives. And every time the response has been to protect the company's interests rather than the victims." She pulled out a folder and slid it across the table to Victoria. "This is everything. Documentation, emails, witness statements. It's damning." Victoria opened the folder and read in silence. With each page, her expression grew colder, more controlled. When she finally looked up, her voice was ice. "Names? All in there. 3 executives currently employed. 2 who've left for other positions but are still in the industry." "And HR's response in each case?" "Minimization, informal mediation, suggesting the women were misinterpreting friendly behavior or being too sensitive." Jennifer's voice shook slightly. "In 2 cases, the women were transferred to different departments because they made their managers uncomfortable. The men faced no consequences." Victoria closed the folder with precise care, as if restraining herself from throwing it across the room. "This ends. Tomorrow I meet with legal to determine our exposure. Then we terminate anyone who's actively engaged in harassment. I don't care about their performance numbers or revenue generation. They're gone." "The board won't like it," Marcus warned. "The board will accept it or find a new CEO." Victoria stood and began pacing, energy radiating off her like heat. "This is exactly the kind of institutional rot we're here to expose. We've been protecting powerful men at the expense of talented women because we've decided that revenue matters more than basic human decency." "Won't this expose the company to lawsuits?" Keisha asked. "Probably. And we'll settle them fairly and publicly acknowledge our failures." Victoria turned back to the group. "I know this is bigger than any of you signed up for. If you want to step back, I understand, but I need to know now, because once we start this process, there's no quiet exit." Ethan looked around the table. Robert with his weathered hands and 20 years of being invisible. Marcus with his careful accounting and knowledge of where all the bodies were buried. Jennifer holding documentation of institutional betrayal. Keisha representing every creative person who'd been exploited for their talent and underpaid for their effort. "I'm in," Ethan said. "All the way." "Me too," Robert added. One by one, they committed. Not because it was safe, because it was right. After the meeting, Ethan was gathering his things when Victoria touched his arm lightly. "Walk with me?" They took the elevator down to the lobby, then out into the November night. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and reflecting the city lights in fractured patterns. "I'm about to blow up my own company," Victoria said, her breath visible in the cold air. "That folder Jennifer gave me, when the board sees it, half of them will want to bury it. The other half will want to bury me for exposing it. So why not bury it? Because I looked at myself in a photograph and realized I'd become someone I despised, someone who built success on top of other people's pain and called it business." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "You asked me on Tuesday how to choose differently. This is how. By refusing to keep protecting a system that's fundamentally broken." Ethan thought about Sophie, about the stable life he'd built for her, about the risks he was taking by being part of this. "My daughter wants a dog." Victoria blinked at the non sequitur. "What?" "Sophie. She wants a dog. Golden retriever, very responsible, teaches empathy." He smiled slightly. "She asked me about it, and I told her we'd have to research whether we could make it work. Research the costs, the responsibilities, whether our life could accommodate something that needs that much care and attention. And I realized I've been doing the same thing with my career, researching whether I could afford to care about anything beyond my daughter's immediate safety, whether our life could accommodate me taking risks for something that matters." He met Victoria's eyes. "Turns out it can. Maybe it even needs to." Victoria nodded slowly, understanding the real meaning beneath his words. "Thank you for taking this risk with me. Thank you for asking us to take it." They walked back to the building in companionable silence. At the entrance, Victoria paused. "That photograph, the one of me at the lake. I'm thinking about going back there. Maybe next month, when we're between crises." She smiled, self-deprecating. Assuming there is such a thing as between crises. There isn't, Ethan said, but you should go anyway. Maybe. She pulled out her keys. Get home to your daughter. And Ethan, start seriously researching those dogs. Stability is important, but so is joy. Sophie deserves both. Driving home, Ethan thought about transformation. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies, but the quiet kind that happens when someone decides to stop accepting what's broken and starts building something better. Victoria was doing that with Datacore, and maybe, carefully, he was doing it with his own life, too. Sophie was already asleep when he got home, but he found a handwritten note on the kitchen table. Dad, I found 3 more reasons we should get a dog. Wake me up if you want to hear them. Love, Sophie, and future dog owner. He smiled and tucked the note into his wallet, next to the picture of Sarah he still carried. Some risks were worth taking. Some changes were worth embracing, even when you couldn't see exactly where they'd lead. The storm hit Datacore 3 days later, and it didn't come quietly. Victoria scheduled an emergency executive meeting for Monday morning, 8 a.m. sharp. Ethan knew about it because she'd sent him a brief email Sunday night. Tomorrow begins the hard part. Thank you for making it possible to see clearly. He didn't sleep well that night. Sophie noticed at breakfast, studying him with the kind of perceptive concern that children sometimes possessed. You look worried, Dad. Just thinking about work stuff. Is everything okay? He poured her cereal, buying himself a moment to find the right words. Everything's fine. Just some big changes happening at the company. Good changes, but change is always a little scary. Mom used to say that scary things are usually worth doing. Sophie took a bite of cereal, thoughtful. She said that before she went to the hospital the last time. She was scared, but she said it was worth it to try. Ethan's chest tightened. Sarah had been so brave at the end, facing treatments that offered diminishing hope because the alternative was giving up entirely. Sophie had been only 4, too young to fully understand what was happening, but old enough to remember her mother's courage. Your mom was right, he said quietly. Scary things are often worth doing. At Datacore, the energy felt different from the moment Ethan stepped off the elevator. Clusters of executives stood in hallways having urgent, low-voiced conversations. Assistants moved with heightened purpose. Something was happening, and the building's invisible network of gossip hadn't quite caught up to what it was yet. Ethan settled into his cubicle and tried to focus on routine work, but his attention kept drifting to his phone, waiting for some sign of how the meeting was going. At 10:15, his phone buzzed. Not Victoria. Marcus from accounting. Break room. Now. You need to hear this. Ethan found Marcus, Jennifer, Robert, and Keisha already gathered, their expressions ranging from shocked to grimly satisfied. She actually did it, Marcus said without preamble. Victoria just terminated 3 senior executives, effective immediately. Security is escorting them out of the building right now. The harassment cases? Ethan asked. All 3 men for my report, Jennifer confirmed, her voice shaking slightly. She brought in outside legal counsel over the weekend. They reviewed everything, verified the documentation, and this morning Victoria presented the board with an ultimatum. Terminate these executives and implement new protocols, or she resigns and takes the story public. What did the board say? They're having an emergency session right now. Marcus rubbed his face tiredly. But word is already spreading. People are asking questions. The executives being escorted out are demanding explanations. It's chaos up there. Keisha was staring at her phone, scrolling through internal company messages. Someone leaked it to the staff forum. There are already 50 comments asking what's going on. Robert leaned against the counter, arms crossed. This is what we wanted, right? Real consequences for bad behavior. So why does it feel like we just lit a match in a fireworks factory? Because we did, Ethan said quietly. And now we get to find out if the building burns down or if something better gets built from the ashes. The day unfolded with the kind of controlled chaos that happens when institutional power structures suddenly shift. By noon, Victoria had sent a company-wide email explaining that 3 executives had been terminated due to substantiated harassment complaints, and that Datacore was implementing comprehensive policy reforms to ensure workplace safety and accountability. The email was professional, direct, and conspicuously lacking in corporate euphemisms. Victoria didn't say the executives had decided to pursue other opportunities, or that there had been mutual agreement to part ways. She said they had engaged in harassment, that the company had failed to address it appropriately, and that this failure ended today. The response was immediate and divided. Some employees expressed relief and gratitude that someone was finally taking action. Others worried about instability and questioned whether Victoria was overreacting. A few suggested she was engaging in some kind of political witch hunt. Ethan spent the afternoon fielding IT requests while monitoring the company's internal temperature through the messages that crossed his desk. A developer asking him to restore access for one of the terminated executives, not yet realizing the termination was permanent. An administrative assistant quietly thanking him for whatever you did to make this happen, even though he'd done nothing except help Victoria see clearly. At 4 p.m., his phone rang, Victoria's direct line. "Can you come up? Conference room C." When he arrived, he found the Thursday group already assembled, looking shell-shocked. "I wanted you to hear this from me first," Victoria said without preamble. She looked exhausted, her usual composure frayed at the edges. The board met for 3 hours. They've agreed to support the terminations and policy reforms, but with conditions. "What conditions?" Jennifer asked. "Independent investigation into all harassment claims filed in the past 5 years, external auditors reviewing our compliance practices, and mandatory sensitivity training for all employees starting with executive leadership." Victoria's smile was tight. "They're also strongly suggesting I bring in a consultant to review my management approach, because apparently holding people accountable is concerning behavior." "That's ridiculous," Keisha said hotly. "You're doing what should have been done years ago." "I know. They know. But the board is nervous about litigation, about stock price impact, about disruption to business operations." Victoria sat down heavily. "The point is, we won, mostly. The men are gone, the policies are changing, but this is just the beginning." Robert cleared his throat. "There's already talk in the maintenance crew, people asking if this means other problems will finally get addressed. The HVAC, the safety issues, all the stuff we've been reporting for years." "That's exactly what it means," Victoria said firmly. "We're not stopping with harassment. We're fixing everything we've documented. But I need to warn you, we've made enemies today, powerful people who benefited from the old system. They're going to push back." "Let them," Marcus said quietly. "I've spent 12 years watching this company protect the wrong people. If there's finally a chance to make it right, I don't care who I make uncomfortable." Jennifer nodded. "The women who reported harassment, I've already heard from 2 of them. They're crying. Not because they're upset, but because someone finally believed them." Her voice cracked slightly. "That's worth whatever comes next." Ethan thought about Sophie's note, about researching dogs and taking risks for joy. "We're all in this already. Might as well see it through." Victoria's expression softened with something that might have been gratitude or relief. "Thank you, all of you. This wouldn't be possible without your honesty." She straightened, pulling herself back into CEO mode. "Which brings me to the next challenge, the security vulnerabilities Ethan identified. I'm presenting his findings to the board next week, along with implementation recommendations." "They're going to hate restricting their own access," Marcus predicted. "Undoubtedly, but we're doing it anyway." Victoria looked at Ethan. "I need you at that meeting to explain the technical details and answer their questions directly." Ethan felt his stomach drop. "You want me to present to the board of directors?" "I want the person who actually understands the problems to explain them to the people who need to approve the solutions. That's you." "I'm an IT technician. I fix computers. I don't do board presentations." "You did a comprehensive security audit that exposed systemic vulnerabilities in our infrastructure. That makes you exactly the person who should be presenting it." Victoria's tone allowed no argument. "Besides, you're the one who said the company assumes some people are more replaceable than others. Time to demonstrate that the people doing the actual work deserve to be heard at the highest levels." Robert chuckled. "She's got you there." "I don't have a suit," Ethan said weakly. "Wear what you always wear," Victoria replied. "I want them to see the person who actually keeps their computers running, not some polished consultant they can dismiss as out of touch with operational reality." After the meeting, Ethan walked to his car in a daze. He was going to present to the board of directors. The board. The people who controlled millions of dollars and made decisions that shaped the entire company. His phone rang before he could even process this development. Sophie's after-school program. Hi, Mr. Cole. This is Amanda. Everything's fine, but Sophie had a little incident today. Ethan's heart jumped. What kind of incident? She got into an argument with another student about dogs. Apparently there was some disagreement about whether golden retrievers or Labrador retrievers make better family pets. It got heated. Sophie may have said some things about the other child's research methodology being flawed. Despite everything, the chaos at work, the upcoming board presentation, the weight of change pressing down on him, Ethan laughed. Is she okay? She's fine. Very adamant about her position. I just wanted to give you a heads up before pickup. When Ethan collected Sophie 20 minutes later, she was sitting with her arms crossed, clearly still aggrieved. Dylan doesn't know anything about dogs, she announced as soon as she saw him. He said labs are better because they're more athletic, but he hasn't even read about breed temperaments or family compatibility factors. Did you tell Dylan this? I told him his research was incomplete and his conclusions were therefore invalid. Ethan bit back another laugh. Sophie, that's not how we talk to friends. He's not my friend if he can't accept scientific evidence. She climbed into the car with the righteous indignation of someone absolutely convinced of their correctness. Can we go to the library? I need to get more books to support my position. We're going home. You're going to eat dinner and do homework and not pick fights about dog breeds. It wasn't picking a fight. It was academic discourse. You're 7. Scientists can be any age, Dad. That evening, after Sophie had grudgingly apologized to Dylan via a carefully worded email about agreeing to disagree on certain canine characteristics, Ethan found himself sitting at his kitchen table, staring at his laptop, and trying to figure out how to present technical security vulnerabilities to people who probably hadn't thought about IT infrastructure since the last time something broke. His phone buzzed. Victoria, naturally. Stop panicking about the presentation. I wasn't panicking. You're absolutely panicking. I can tell because you haven't responded to any of my emails in 3 hours, which means you're overthinking. There was a pause. Want to practice? It's 8:30 at night. And you're still awake worrying about it. Come on, video call. Show me what you're planning to say. Ethan set up his laptop in his small living room, angling it so the camera wouldn't show the chaos of single-parent life scattered behind him. Victoria appeared on screen, dressed in jeans and a sweater, hair down, looking more like the woman from the photograph than the CEO who'd terminated 3 executives that morning. Start from the beginning, she said. Pretend I know nothing about IT security. You know plenty about IT security. Pretend I'm a board member who thinks the cloud is a weather phenomenon. Go. Ethan walked through his findings, explaining access controls and audit trails and vulnerability points. Victoria asked sharp questions, pushed back on anything unclear, and made him simplify jargon until his explanations were accessible without being condescending. Better, she said after his 3rd attempt at explaining password policy enforcement. But don't apologize for technical details. You're the expert. Own that. I'm not used to being the expert in the room. Get used to it, because after this presentation, the board is going to understand that the people they've been overlooking are the ones who actually know how their company functions. Victoria shifted on screen, tucking her legs under her. How's Sophie? Currently feuding with a classmate about dog breeds. Sounds serious. She accused him of methodological flaws in his research. Victoria laughed, genuine and warm. She sounds like her father, principled and unwilling to accept sloppy thinking. She sounds like her mother, actually. Sarah was the one who never let me get away with lazy arguments. Ethan smiled at the memory. She would have liked this, I think. What we're doing at DataCore. She always said that the most important thing you could do was tell the truth, even when it was uncomfortable. She sounds remarkable. She was. She made me better than I would have been on my own. He paused, then added quietly, the last few weeks, working on this project with you, it's the first time since she died that I felt like I was part of something larger than just survival. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Thank you for telling me that, and for taking the risk to be part of this. I know it's not easy, especially with Sophie to think about. Sophie's the reason I'm doing it, actually. I want her to grow up knowing that when you see something wrong, you try to fix it, even when it's hard, even when it's scary. Scary things are usually worth doing, Victoria said softly. That's what Sophie told me this morning, something her mother used to say. They talked for another hour, ostensibly about the presentation, but really about everything else. Victoria mentioned her own childhood, growing up in a family where achievement was the only currency that mattered, where vulnerability was weakness and ambition was virtue. Ethan talked about meeting Sarah in college, about building a life together that felt possible until cancer made it temporary. I haven't told anyone that story in 2 years, Ethan said finally. Not even my parents. It's easier to just keep moving forward without looking back. I understand that impulse. Victoria's expression was thoughtful. After I broke up with my last serious relationship, 8 years ago, right before I stopped going to the lake, I decided it was easier to just focus on work. No distractions, no complications, no risk of loss. And I was right. It was easier. It was also hollow. Are you regretting it now? I'm regretting that I didn't realize hollowness wasn't the same as strength until I saw my own photograph and didn't recognize the person I'd become. She smiled slightly, but maybe it's not too late to choose differently. After they hung up, Ethan sat in his quiet living room, thinking about choices and consequences. Victoria was risking her career to fix what was broken. He was risking his comfortable invisibility to help her do it. And both of them were learning that the life you built to protect yourself could sometimes become the very thing that limited you. The board presentation happened Thursday afternoon in a conference room that felt designed to intimidate. Leather chairs, mahogany table, wall-mounted screens showing stock prices and financial projections. 12 board members arranged in a semicircle, all of them watching Ethan with varying degrees of skepticism. Victoria sat at the head of the table, and her presence was the only reason Ethan managed to walk to the front of the room without turning around and leaving. Members of the board, Victoria began, I've asked Ethan Cole from our IT department to present findings from a security audit he conducted. His assessment reveals critical vulnerabilities in our infrastructure that require immediate attention. She gestured to Ethan. The floor is yours. He connected his laptop to the projection system with hands that only shook slightly, then turned to face 12 of the most powerful people in the company. Good afternoon. I'm Ethan Cole. I've worked in IT at DataCore for 5 years, primarily in systems maintenance and user support. 3 weeks ago, Victoria asked me to assess our data security practices. What I found should concern all of you. He clicked to the first slide showing a simple diagram of DataCore's network architecture. Our external security is excellent. We have strong firewalls, encrypted communications, and robust protection against outside threats. But our internal security is a different story. Click. A new slide showing access control matrices. Currently, over 300 employees have administrative access to sensitive financial data. That includes quarterly reports, merger discussions, salary information, and strategic planning documents. None of these people have any business reason to access this information. They have access because at some point someone decided it was easier to grant broad permissions than to manage them properly. One board member, a silver-haired man in an expensive suit, leaned forward. Are you suggesting our own employees are a security threat? I'm stating a fact. When hundreds of people can access confidential information without any meaningful oversight, you're vulnerable to both intentional theft and accidental exposure. And currently we have no way of knowing who's accessing what or when. That seems like an overstatement, another board member said. We have logs, audit trails. We have logs that no one monitors and audit trails that don't capture granular access patterns. Ethan interrupted, keeping his voice steady. I can access executive compensation data right now from my desk and leave no meaningful trace. So can 299 other people. That's not security. That's security theater. The room fell silent. Victoria caught his eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. Keep going. Ethan clicked through more slides, detailing password vulnerabilities, explaining the difference between theoretical policies and actual enforcement, demonstrating how easy it would be for someone with modest technical skills to access systems they shouldn't. The solution requires 3 things, he concluded. First, implement role-based access controls. People get access to exactly what they need for their jobs. nothing more. Second, deploy real-time monitoring with automated alerts for unusual access patterns. Third, enforce password policies through technical controls, not just policy documents. What's the cost? Someone asked. Approximately $400,000 for implementation, ongoing costs around $75,000 annually for monitoring and maintenance. Ethan met the board member's eyes. What's the cost of a data breach? Of stolen intellectual property? Of confidential information being sold to competitors? Those numbers make $400,000 look like a bargain. More questions followed, about timeline, about disruption to operations, about why this hadn't been identified sooner. Ethan answered each one directly, refusing to soften the truth or make excuses for past negligence. Finally, the silver-haired executive who'd questioned him earlier sat back in his chair. I've been on this board for 6 years. This is the first time someone below director level has presented to us. He looked at Victoria. Why him? Why not your CTO? Because Ethan is the person who actually understands how our systems work, Victoria said calmly. He doesn't manage IT. He does IT. That makes his perspective more valuable than someone 3 layers removed from operational reality. That's an interesting management philosophy. It's also how we're going to start operating going forward. The people closest to problems are often the ones with the best solutions. We've been making decisions based on hierarchy rather than expertise. That changes now. The board exchanged glances, and Ethan could practically see them processing the implications. This wasn't just about security. Victoria was signaling a fundamental shift in how DataCore valued different kinds of knowledge and contribution. After 90 minutes of discussion, the board voted to approve the security implementation with a budget even larger than Ethan had requested, contingent on quarterly progress reports. Walking out of the conference room, Ethan felt like he'd just run a marathon. His shirt was damp with nervous sweat, and his hands were still shaking from adrenaline. Victoria caught up with him at the elevator. You did beautifully, direct, confident, and you didn't let them intimidate you. I was terrified the entire time. Being terrified and doing it anyway is called courage. She pressed the elevator button. Also, you just convinced 12 skeptical board members to invest $500,000 based on your assessment. That's not nothing. The elevator arrived and they stepped in together, alone for the first time all day. Can I ask you something? Ethan said as the doors closed. Of course. Why me? Specifically me, for all of this. There are more senior people in IT, people with management experience, with credentials, Because you told me the truth about a photograph when you could have just fixed my computer and left, Victoria interrupted. Because when I asked what you thought, you didn't tell me what you thought I wanted to hear. Because you see people clearly and you give a damn about whether they're being treated with dignity. She looked at him directly. Those qualities are rarer than technical expertise, and they're exactly what's needed to fix what's broken here. The elevator reached the IT floor and Ethan stepped out, then turned back. That lake, the one from your photograph, you should really go back there. Not someday. Soon. Victoria smiled, and for a moment she looked like the woman on the dock again. I'm thinking about it. December, maybe? After we finish implementing the security changes and the new harassment protocols, and there will always be another crisis, another deadline, another reason to delay. Ethan held the elevator door. Sophie's teaching me that sometimes you have to choose joy even when it's inconvenient, especially when it's inconvenient. When did you get so wise? I've got a 7-year-old who argues about dog breeds using scientific methodology. Wisdom is a survival requirement. That evening, Ethan picked up Sophie and took her to the library as promised. She collected an armful of books about golden retrievers, their care, training, and psychological profiles. On the drive home, she read aloud statistics about temperament and loyalty, while Ethan listened and thought about commitment. Getting a dog was a commitment to care, to responsibility, to making room in their carefully controlled life for something that needed attention and love. It was risky. It would be complicated. It might be exactly what they needed. Dad, Sophie said, looking up from her book, if we get a dog, can we name him something scientific, like Darwin or Einstein or Galileo? We're not naming our hypothetical dog after scientists. Why not? Dogs are smart. They deserve smart names. How about we find out if we're actually getting a dog before we start the naming committee? Sophie considered this. Fair point, but I'm making a list of potential names just in case, for research purposes. Later, after Sophie was asleep, Ethan sat down and did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He opened his laptop and started looking at dog adoption websites. Not just researching anymore, actually looking at golden retrievers in shelters waiting for families, at adoption requirements and home visit protocols, and all the practical logistics of bringing a living creature into their apartment. It felt terrifying and possible at the same time. His phone buzzed with an email from Victoria, sent at 11 p.m. Board approved everything. Security implementation starts next month. Also, I booked a cabin at Lake Wenatchee for first weekend in December. Taking your advice about choosing joy. Thank you for pushing me. Ethan smiled and typed back. Proud of you. Also, I might be getting Sophie a dog. Apparently, we're both choosing scary things that are worth doing. The response came immediately. Tell Sophie I expect regular updates on this dog, especially the naming process. I have opinions about scientists. She'll be delighted to have another ally. That's what happens when you build real relationships instead of just professional ones. You get people who care about your hypothetical dog names. Ethan set down his phone and looked around his small apartment, at Sophie's backpack by the door and her shoes scattered in the hallway, at the pictures of Sarah still displayed on the walls alongside Sophie's artwork, at the life he'd built that was safe and limited and suddenly opening up into something larger. Change was terrifying, but staying the same was its own kind of death. 3 years ago, he'd chosen survival. Now, carefully, he was choosing to live. The dog arrived on a Saturday morning 2 weeks later, and nothing about Ethan's carefully organized life would ever be quite the same. Sophie had been relentless in her campaign. She'd created spreadsheets of adoption costs, written a persuasive essay on canine companionship, and recruited her teacher to provide a reference letter attesting to her responsibility. When Ethan had finally said yes, really, truly yes, she'd cried with the kind of overwhelming joy that reminded him why parenthood was worth every sacrifice. They'd chosen a 2-year-old golden retriever named Charlie from a shelter 30 minutes outside Seattle. The dog had been surrendered when his previous owner moved overseas, and he sat in the shelter kennel with the patient resignation of someone who'd learned not to expect much from life but hadn't given up hoping. Sophie had taken one look at him and announced, "That's our dog, Dad. He needs us." And somehow, she'd been right. Now Charlie was sprawled across their living room floor, tail thumping occasionally against the couch, while Sophie read him her latest library book about canine intelligence. Ethan watched from the kitchen, making coffee and marveling at how quickly chaos could become comfort. His phone buzzed. Victoria, checking in as she'd been doing with increasing frequency over the past 2 weeks. How's Charlie settling in? He's already claimed the couch and Sophie's heart. I think we're the ones settling in around him. Pictures required, for research purposes. Ethan snapped a photo of Sophie and Charlie, the dog's head resting in her lap while she read, both of them perfectly content. He sent it to Victoria and got back 3 heart emojis, which, from a CEO, felt like a significant emotional display. We're still on for Thursday? He typed. Absolutely. Also, can you come by my office Monday afternoon? Need to discuss something. That sounds ominous. It's not, promise. Just easier to talk in person. Monday morning arrived with Seattle's typical November gray, the kind of weather that made staying in bed with a warm dog seem infinitely more appealing than going to work. But Charlie had already learned the morning routine: breakfast, quick walk, enthusiastic goodbye at the door. And Sophie was teaching him to sit on command with the focused determination of a drill sergeant. He's getting better, she announced as Ethan prepared to leave. Watch, Charlie, sit. Charlie looked at her with affectionate confusion, then wandered over to sniff Ethan's shoes. He's learning, Sophie insisted. Rome wasn't built in a day, Dad. Who taught you that phrase? Mrs. Peterson. She says it when we don't understand fractions immediately. At DataCore, the atmosphere had shifted noticeably since the executive terminations and Ethan's board presentation. People moved differently through the halls, spoke more openly in break rooms, seemed less afraid to acknowledge problems. The security implementation was underway, much to the irritation of senior staff who'd suddenly found their access restricted. and Jennifer had reported that harassment complaints were being taken seriously for the first time in years. But change created its own friction. Ethan had overheard conversations in the elevator about Victoria overreaching, about political correctness run amok, about good people being punished for minor mistakes. The resistance was quieter than he'd expected, but more persistent, like water finding cracks in concrete. At 3 p.m., he made his way to Victoria's office, curious about what couldn't be discussed over email. She was at her desk, reviewing documents with the focused intensity he'd come to recognize. But when he entered, she set everything aside and gestured to the chairs by her window. "Coffee?" she offered. "I'm good. What's going on?" Victoria sat across from him, and he noticed she looked tired. Not exhausted exactly, but carrying the weight of too many decisions without enough support. "I wanted to talk to you about something before Thursday's meeting," she began. "The board has asked me to formalize our project group, turn it into an official committee with budget and institutional backing." "That sounds like good news." "It should be. But there's a catch." Victoria leaned forward. "They want me to appoint a director to run it. Someone with management experience who can interface with executives and coordinate across departments. They've already suggested 3 candidates, all internal, all politically safe choices who won't actually push for real change." Ethan could see where this was going. "And you want to push back." "I want to appoint you." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and terrifying. "Victoria, I can't. I'm not—" Ethan stopped, trying to organize his thoughts. "I'm an IT technician. I don't have management experience. I've never coordinated anything more complicated than server upgrades. You presented to the board and convinced them to invest $500,000. You identified systemic problems that executives missed. You've earned the trust of people across departments who've never trusted management." Victoria's expression was calm but determined. "You're exactly the person this role needs. The board will never approve it. The board doesn't get to approve it. I do. This is an internal appointment reporting directly to me." She pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. "Director of Institutional Integrity. Salary increase of 40%. Small team to support you. Authority to investigate any department and make recommendations directly to executive leadership." Ethan opened the folder with hands that had started shaking. The job description was comprehensive, ambitious, and completely outside anything he'd ever imagined for himself. It was also everything they'd been doing on Thursdays, but with real power behind it. "I can't accept this," he said quietly. "Why not?" "Because I have a daughter who needs stability. Because I've spent 3 years building a life that's predictable and safe. Because taking a role like this means stepping into conflict and controversy and all the things I've been avoiding." He looked up at Victoria. "Because I'm scared." "I know. I'm asking anyway." "Why? Why does it have to be me?" Victoria was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "Because you see people. Not positions, not productivity metrics, not corporate value. People. And because you'll fight for what's right even when it's personally costly." She paused. "And because I need someone I can trust completely, and you're the only person in this building who's proven I can. That's not fair. That's not using trust as leverage." "No, it's not. But it's true." Victoria stood and moved to the window, looking out at the city. "I'm trying to change DataCore from the inside, and it's harder than I expected. Every reform faces resistance. Every policy change gets watered down in committee. Every attempt to hold people accountable gets met with legal concerns and political maneuvering. I need someone who won't compromise on the things that matter." "And you think that's me?" "I know it is. You proved it when you told me the truth about that photograph, when you called out institutional rot in front of the board, when you pushed me to go back to the lake instead of making excuses." She turned back to face him. "You don't have to answer now. Think about it. Talk to Sophie about it. But Ethan, don't say no just because it's scary. Say no if it's wrong. Those are different things." After leaving Victoria's office, Ethan couldn't go back to his desk. He needed to think, to process, to figure out what the hell he was supposed to do with an offer that could change everything. He found himself in the building's small roof garden, a space most employees didn't know existed. It was technically for executive use, but the door was usually unlocked, and Ethan had discovered it years ago during a particularly frustrating day. Robert was already there, sitting on a bench and eating a sandwich with the methodical efficiency of someone who'd perfected the 15-minute lunch break. "Didn't expect company," Robert said, but he made space on the bench. Ethan sat down, grateful for the silence. After a few minutes, Robert spoke again. "You look like someone just offered you something you want, but probably shouldn't take." "That obvious?" "I've been working 40 years, I know that look." Robert finished his sandwich and pulled out a thermos of coffee. "Want to talk about it?" Ethan found himself explaining the offer, the job description, the impossible choice between safety and significance. Robert listened without interrupting, the way people did when they'd learned that sometimes others just needed to speak their thoughts aloud. "My son asked me something once," Robert said when Ethan finished. "He was maybe 10, and I'd just turned down a promotion because it would have meant relocating. He asked why I didn't take it if it meant more money and a better title." Robert poured coffee into the thermos cap. "I told him that some things matter more than advancement. Being there for his mother, staying in a community we knew, having stability." "That makes sense." "It did, until he asked me if I'd taught him to be safe or to be brave." Robert smiled slightly. "Damn kid was too smart for his own good. Made me realize I'd been using him as an excuse not to take risks, when what I was really afraid of was failing." "Did you regret not taking the promotion?" "Every damn day for 5 years. Then I stopped regretting it and started living with the choice I'd made." He looked at Ethan. "But my situation was different. I was avoiding risk because I was scared of change. You're avoiding risk because you're protecting your daughter. Those aren't the same thing." "How do I know which one I'm doing?" "Ask yourself what you'd want Sophie to do in your position. When she's grown and facing a choice between safety and significance, what would you hope she'd choose?" Ethan thought about Sophie reading to Charlie, about her fierce defense of scientific methodology, about the way she approached the world with the conviction that things could be better if you just tried hard enough. "I'd want her to be brave," he admitted, "even if it scared her, especially if it scared her." "Then you have your answer." Robert stood, collecting his thermos. "Also, that dog of yours. Golden Retriever, right?" "How did you know?" "Jennifer mentioned it in the break room, said Sophie's been showing everyone pictures." Robert smiled. "Dogs are good for kids. Teach them responsibility, give them something to love. My son had a retriever growing up. Best decision we ever made, even when the damn thing chewed through 3 pairs of my work boots." After Robert left, Ethan sat alone in the roof garden and thought about choices. About the life he'd built that was safe but limiting. About the opportunities he'd turned down because protecting Sophie had become synonymous with avoiding risk. About the difference between being careful and being afraid. His phone buzzed with a message from Sophie's school. "Parent-teacher conference available Thursday 4 p.m. Please confirm attendance." Thursday. The same day as their regular project meeting. He could do the conference and miss the meeting, or skip the conference and maintain his commitment to the work they'd started. Except that wasn't really the choice, was it? He could be present for Sophie and engaged in meaningful work. The two things weren't mutually exclusive. He'd just been telling himself they were because it was easier than figuring out how to balance them. Ethan typed a response. "Can we do 5:30 instead? Work conflict at 4. The reply came quickly. "5:30 works. See you then." That evening, Ethan made Sophie's favorite dinner, spaghetti with meat sauce and garlic bread, and tried to figure out how to explain a potential job change to a 7-year-old without making it sound scarier than it was. "Sophie, I need to talk to you about something." She looked up from where she was teaching Charlie to shake hands, immediately alert to the serious tone. "Am I in trouble?" "No, sweetheart, nothing like that. I got offered a new job at DataCore, a promotion." "That's good, right? Promotions are good." "Usually, yes. But this one would mean more responsibility and probably longer hours sometimes. I wanted to make sure you were okay with it before I made any decisions." Sophie sat back, considering this with the gravity of someone much older. "Would you still pick me up from school?" "Every day I possibly can. Some days I might be a little late, but I'd arrange for you to stay at the program until I could get there." "Would we still have time for homework and dinner and stories?" "Absolutely. Those things don't change." "Would you be happy doing the new job?" The question caught him off guard. I think so, yes. It would be challenging, but in a good way. Sophie looked at Charlie, who was sitting patiently waiting for his next training cue. Mom used to say that challenges help us grow. That's why she went back to school even when she was sick, remember? Because learning new things made her feel alive. Ethan's throat tightened. Sarah had indeed gone back to school during her cancer treatment, taking a single literature class because she'd refused to let illness define her entire existence. She'd written essays from hospital beds and participated in discussions via video call, and she'd gotten an A despite everything. You're right, she did say that. So I think you should take the job, if it makes you feel alive. Sophie resumed trying to teach Charlie to shake. Plus, we have Charlie now to keep me company if you're late sometimes. He's very good at listening. Charlie can't actually understand you, you know. That's what you think. Charlie, tell Dad he's wrong. Charlie barked once, tail wagging. See? He agrees with me. Later that night, after Sophie and Charlie were both asleep, Sophie in her bed, Charlie on a dog bed beside her that he'd claimed with immediate certainty, Ethan sat at his kitchen table and typed an email to Victoria. I'll take the job, but I have conditions. First, I need flexibility for school events and family emergencies. Sophie comes first, always. Second, I want to keep the Thursday group intact. Those people took real risks to speak honestly, and I won't let this become corporate bureaucracy that forgets why we started. Third, I need your commitment that when I tell you hard truths, you'll listen. Even when they are about you or your decisions, especially then. If you can agree to those conditions, I'll accept the position. If not, I'll stay in IT and support the work however I can from there. Also, Charlie says hello and wants you to know that golden retrievers are objectively superior to all other dog breeds. Sophie has citations to support this claim. He hit send before he could reconsider, then sat in the quiet of his apartment listening to Charlie's soft snoring from Sophie's room. The response came 10 minutes later. All conditions accepted. Thrilled to have you. Also, please tell Charlie that I'm deeply impressed by his scientific rigor, and Sophie should bring him to the office sometime. Every workplace needs a good dog. See you Thursday. VH. Ethan smiled despite the nervousness churning in his stomach. He'd just agreed to step out of invisibility and into a role that would make him a target for everyone who benefited from the old systems. He'd signed up for conflict and controversy and all the complications he'd been avoiding, but he'd also signed up for the chance to fix things that were genuinely broken, to support people who'd been overlooked, to build something better than what existed. Scary things were worth doing. Sophie had been right about that. Thursday's meeting had a different energy from the previous ones. Word had spread about the committee formalization and Ethan's appointment, and people arrived with the kind of cautious optimism that suggested they were starting to believe change might actually be possible. Before we start, Victoria said, I want to address the elephant in the room. The board has formalized this group as the Institutional Integrity Committee, with budget and authority to investigate and recommend changes across all departments. Ethan will be directing the committee, reporting directly to me. Marcus started to applaud, then the others joined in. Ethan felt his face heat with embarrassment. I didn't accept this to get applause. I accepted because what we're doing matters. Exactly why you're the right person for it, Jennifer said. Anyone who wanted the power would be the wrong choice. Let's talk about what's next, Victoria said, pulling up a presentation on the screen. We've addressed harassment protocols and security vulnerabilities. Now we need to tackle the systemic issues, HVAC and maintenance, creative department burnout, accounting transparency, wage equity across departments. That's a lot, Keisha said. How do we prioritize? We start with what's hurting people the most and work our way down, Ethan said. Robert, the HVAC situation on 14. How bad is it really? Bad enough that people are working in 80-degree heat during summer and 55 degrees in winter. Bad enough that I've documented 3 cases of heat exhaustion and multiple respiratory complaints from poor air circulation. Robert pulled out a tablet with maintenance logs. I've been trying to get this addressed for 3 years. Every time it gets bumped for other priorities. Not anymore, Victoria said firmly. Submit a formal proposal by next week. I'll get it approved. Just like that? Just like that. If people can't work in safe, comfortable conditions, nothing else we're doing matters. The meeting continued for 2 hours, diving into specifics and assigning responsibilities. Ethan found himself coordinating between departments, identifying resources, mapping out timelines. It was completely different from anything he'd done before, and it felt right in a way that surprised him. After the meeting, Ethan rushed to make Sophie's parent-teacher conference. He arrived at 5:25, slightly out of breath, to find Mrs. Peterson waiting with a folder of Sophie's work. "Mr. Cole, thank you for coming. I wanted to talk to you about Sophie's progress. Is everything okay?" "Everything's wonderful. Sophie is one of my brightest students. She's reading above grade level, excels in science, and her math skills have improved tremendously since the beginning of the year." Mrs. Peterson opened the folder. "But I'm a little concerned about her social development." Ethan's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "She tends to be very literal and fact-focused, which is excellent for academic work but can make peer relationships challenging. The incident with Dylan about dog breeds, for example. Sophie was technically correct in her assessment, but she didn't understand why her approach upset him. I talked to her about that. She apologized." "I know, and she did so very graciously, but I think it might help if Sophie had some practice with emotional intelligence, understanding that people can have different opinions without one being objectively wrong, learning to value relationships alongside being right." Ethan thought about Sophie's fierce dedication to scientific accuracy, her 7-year-old certainty about how the world should work. So much like Sarah, who'd approached life with the same conviction that truth mattered more than comfort. "How do I teach her that without making her feel like she needs to be less herself?" Mrs. Peterson smiled. "By modeling it. Show her that you can be principled and kind, that you can stand up for what's right while still respecting people who see things differently. That being smart doesn't mean always proving you're the smartest person in the room." The words hit harder than they should have. Wasn't that exactly what he was learning at DataCore? How to speak truth while building bridges? How to challenge systems without dismissing the people within them? "I'll work on it," he said. "With her and with myself." That evening, Ethan and Sophie took Charlie for a walk around their neighborhood. The dog trotted between them, tail wagging, occasionally stopping to investigate interesting smells with the thorough dedication of a researcher. "Mrs. Peterson says I need to work on emotional intelligence," Sophie announced. "She mentioned that to me too." "What does that mean exactly?" "It means understanding that being right isn't always the most important thing. Sometimes being kind matters more." Sophie considered this while Charlie investigated a particularly fascinating fire hydrant. But what if someone is wrong about something important? Like if they said golden retrievers weren't good family dogs when there's scientific evidence that they are. Then you can share the evidence without making the other person feel bad for not knowing it. You can be right and kind at the same time. That sounds hard. It is hard. I'm still learning how to do it myself. They walked in silence for a while, Charlie leading them on his preferred route through the neighborhood. "Dad?" Sophie said eventually. "Are you nervous about your new job?" "Terrified, actually." "But you're doing it anyway?" "Yes." "Because scary things are worth doing?" "Because some scary things are worth doing, not all of them. But this one is." Sophie reached up and took his hand, something she didn't do as often now that she was 7 and increasingly independent. "I'm proud of you for being brave." Ethan squeezed her hand gently, feeling the weight of her trust and the responsibility it carried. "I'm proud of you too, kiddo. Every single day." When they got home, Ethan's phone showed a text from Victoria. "How was the parent conference?" "Good. Sophie's brilliant and socially awkward. Apparently she gets both from me." "Brilliant and socially awkward people change the world. Tell her she's an excellent company." "Will do. How are you doing? Big changes coming?" There was a pause before the response came. "Honestly, I'm terrified that I'm asking too much of people, that this will all fall apart and everyone who trusted me will pay the price." "Then we'll be terrified together and do it anyway. That's what teams are for." "When did you become an optimist?" "When I got a dog and accepted a job I'm completely unqualified for. Apparently I'm embracing chaos." "Good. Chaos is where real change happens. See you Monday, Director Cole." Ethan set down his phone and looked around his apartment. Charlie was sprawled on the floor. Sophie was drawing pictures of dogs with careful attention to anatomical accuracy, and everything felt both completely different and exactly right. He'd spent 3 years building walls around his life to keep Sophie safe. Now he was learning that safety and growth weren't opposites. They were partners in the difficult work of living fully. The next chapter would be complicated. There would be resistance and setbacks, and moments when he questioned whether he'd made the right choice. But for the first time since Sarah died, Ethan felt like he was moving towards something rather than just surviving. And that, he was learning, made all the difference. Monday morning, Ethan walked into DataCore with a new title, a new office, and the uncomfortable awareness that he'd just made himself visible to everyone who preferred the old systems to stay exactly as they were. His new workspace was on the 19th floor, positioned deliberately between executive territory and the departments he'd be working with. It was smaller than he'd expected, just enough room for a desk, 2 chairs, and a window that looked out over the city, but it felt significant in ways that had nothing to do with square footage. Victoria appeared in his doorway at 9 a.m. sharp, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this. First day jitters are real. I've worked here for 5 years. Why am I nervous?" "Because you're visible now. No more hiding behind server racks and password resets." She handed him the coffee and sat in one of the chairs. "How's it feel?" "Like I'm about to disappoint a lot of people who are expecting me to fail." "Good. Use that. The best way to prove people wrong is to succeed anyway." Victoria pulled out her tablet. "I've scheduled meetings for you this week with every department head. They know you have my full backing, but you'll need to establish your own credibility." "What if they don't take me seriously?" "Then you remind them that you presented to the board and secured $500,000 in funding while most of them were still filing expense reports incorrectly." Her smile was sharp. "You earned this position, Ethan. Own it." The first test came that afternoon when Ethan met with Richard Thornton, VP of Sales and one of the executives who'd been loudest about Victoria's overreach in the harassment terminations. Richard was 53, expensively suited, and radiated the kind of confidence that came from decades of never being told no. "Director Cole," Richard said, managing to make the title sound like a joke. "Congratulations on your promotion. Quite a jump from IT support." "Thank you. I'm looking forward to working with your department." "Are you? Because from where I'm sitting, this whole institutional integrity initiative looks like a witch hunt designed to make executives uncomfortable for doing their jobs." Ethan set down his notebook with careful precision. "If your job involves creating hostile work environments or ignoring documented harassment, then yes, you should be uncomfortable. If it doesn't, we won't have any problems." Richard's expression hardened. "I've been in sales for 30 years. I know how to manage people. I don't need some IT technician with delusions of authority telling me how to run my department." "Then show me you don't need it. Your department has the highest turnover rate in the company, the most HR complaints, and the lowest employee satisfaction scores. Those are facts, not delusions." Ethan met Richard's eyes steadily. "I'm here to understand why and help fix it. You can work with me or against me, but either way, the problems are getting addressed." "Is that a threat?" "It's a statement of priority. Victoria gave me authority to investigate any department and make recommendations directly to her. I'd prefer to do that collaboratively, but I'll do it regardless." The meeting ended 20 minutes later with Richard making vague promises to review his department's practices while making it very clear he considered the entire exercise a waste of his valuable time. Ethan left feeling like he'd just survived the first round of a fight that was far from over. Jennifer caught up with him in the hallway afterward, her expression concerned. "I heard raised voices. You okay?" "Richard Thornton thinks I'm on a witch hunt." "Richard Thornton is worried you're going to expose the fact that his top 3 salespeople are all men he personally hired despite better qualified women applicants." Jennifer lowered her voice. "I've got documentation if you need it." "Save it. We'll need a comprehensive review of hiring practices across departments. Put sales at the top of the list." Over the next 2 weeks, Ethan threw himself into the work with the kind of focused intensity he usually reserved for critical system failures. He reviewed hiring records, compensation data, and performance evaluations. He conducted confidential interviews with employees across departments, promising anonymity and actually delivering it. He attended meetings where executives tested him, questioned his authority, and tried to determine whether he was a genuine threat or just Victoria's temporary pet project. The resistance was real, and persistent. People who'd benefited from the old systems pushed back in 1,000 small ways: delayed responses to information requests, procedural objections to new policies, quiet campaigns to undermine his credibility. More than once, Ethan found himself wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake taking this role. But then there were the other moments. The junior accountant who stopped him in the hallway to say thank you for actually investigating her salary complaint. The facilities worker who showed him deferred maintenance issues that had been ignored for years. The designer who cried when he told her the creative department's workload was being formally reviewed and adjusted. Those moments reminded him why this mattered. Sophie noticed the change in him during their evening routines. He was more tired, more preoccupied, but also more engaged with the world beyond their small apartment. They fell into new patterns, Sophie doing homework while Ethan reviewed reports, both of them taking breaks to play with Charlie, who'd become the household's emotional barometer and general source of chaos. "Dad, you're distracted again," Sophie said one evening while they were supposed to be working on her math homework. "Sorry, kiddo. What's the question?" "If Sarah has 12 apples and gives away 5, how many does she have left?" Ethan blinked, momentarily disoriented by the coincidence of the name. 7. She has 7 left. "I know that. I was testing if you were paying attention." Sophie looked at him seriously. "You're thinking about work a lot now." "I am. Is that bothering you?" She considered the question with her characteristic thoroughness. "Not bothering exactly, but sometimes you have the same face you had right after Mom died, like you're worried about things you can't control." The observation hit him harder than it should have. "I'm not worried like that. This is different. I'm trying to fix things that are broken. Can you fix them?" "I don't know yet, but I'm trying." Mom used to say that trying was half of succeeding. The other half was not giving up. Ethan pulled her into a hug, grateful for the wisdom she carried without fully understanding its weight. "Your mom was a very smart person." "I know. That's why I'm smart too. Genetics." The breakthrough came 3 weeks into Ethan's new role, during a meeting he'd called with all department heads to present his initial findings. Victoria attended but deliberately sat in the back, making it clear this was Ethan's show. He'd prepared a presentation that was comprehensive, data-driven, and diplomatically devastating. He walked through hiring disparities, wage inequities, productivity metrics that revealed systemic problems, and cultural issues that had been normalized over years of institutional neglect. "The pattern is clear," Ethan said, advancing to a slide that showed comparative data across departments. "We've created a 2-tier system where certain employees are valued and invested in, while others are treated as functionally replaceable. This isn't accidental. It's the result of hundreds of small decisions that prioritize short-term efficiency over long-term sustainability." Richard Thornton leaned forward. "These are just numbers. They don't tell the whole story." "You're right, so let me tell you the stories behind them." Ethan clicked to the next slide, showing anonymous quotes from employee interviews. 23 women in sales reported being passed over for promotions in favor of less qualified men. 15 maintenance workers described safety violations that were documented and ignored. 41 creative staff are actively looking for new jobs because of unsustainable workload expectations. He let that sink in, watching the executives shift uncomfortably. "Here's what this costs us. Annual turnover rate of 32% means we're constantly training new employees instead of retaining experienced ones. Low morale leads to decreased productivity, which we measure at approximately $2.3 million in lost efficiency annually. And the reputational damage from harassment settlements and negative employer reviews costs us top talent who choose to work elsewhere." "So, what's your solution?" asked Margaret Chen, VP of Operations and one of the few executives who'd been genuinely receptive to the changes. "You've identified problems. What's the fix?" Ethan advanced to his recommendations. First, mandatory wage equity review with adjustments where disparities can't be justified by performance or experience. Second, revised hiring practices with diverse candidate slates and blind resume reviews. Third, workload analysis across all departments with staffing adjustments where we're asking people to do impossible jobs. Fourth, promotion processes that require documented justification and multiple-level approval to prevent bias. "That's going to cost millions," someone objected. "Yes, less than we're currently losing to turnover and inefficiency, but yes, it's expensive." Ethan met their eyes steadily. The question isn't whether we can afford to do this, it's whether we can afford not to. Because the current system is failing, and it's failing the people who actually make this company function. The room erupted in objections, questions, and defensive explanations. Ethan fielded them calmly, refusing to back down while remaining open to legitimate concerns. He felt Victoria's presence in the back of the room like a steady anchor, supporting without interfering. Finally, Margaret spoke again. I move that we approve Phase 1 of these recommendations, the wage equity review and hiring practice reforms, with a 6-month timeline for implementation and quarterly progress reports. Second, said another voice, then another. When Victoria called for a vote, 8 of 12 department heads approved. It wasn't unanimous, but it was enough. After the meeting, Ethan found himself alone in the conference room, staring at his laptop and trying to process what had just happened. They'd actually done it. Not completely, not permanently, but real measurable change was going to happen. Victoria appeared in the doorway. That was remarkable. You held them accountable without being antagonistic, made them see the business case without losing sight of the human cost. Richard voted against it. Richard votes against everything that threatens his comfortable little empire. Ignore him. She sat down beside Ethan. You know what this means, right? We're actually going to fix things. Not perfectly, not immediately, but genuinely make DataCore better. It's terrifying. Most worthwhile things are. Victoria smiled. Speaking of terrifying, I'm going to the lake this weekend, the cabin I mentioned, and I was wondering if you and Sophie might want to come along. Ethan looked at her in surprise. To Lake Wenatchee. I rented a place with 2 bedrooms. Thought Sophie might enjoy it. Plus Charlie's welcome. The property has trails and a private dock. Victoria's expression was carefully neutral, but Ethan could see the vulnerability beneath it. I'm not trying to be inappropriate. I just thought it might be nice to spend time together outside of work crises. As friends. Friends. The word carried weight they both felt but weren't quite ready to name. Let me talk to Sophie, Ethan said, but I think she'd love it. Fair warning, though, she'll want to bring approximately 17 books about dogs and will expect you to validate her research. I wouldn't have it any other way. That evening, Ethan presented the idea to Sophie with careful casualness, trying not to project his own complicated feelings about spending a weekend with Victoria outside the office. So my boss invited us to her cabin at a lake this weekend. There are hiking trails and a dock, and it's dog-friendly. What do you think? Sophie looked up from where she was teaching Charlie to roll over. Is your boss the lady who likes my dog research? That's her. Is she nice? She's very nice. Also very smart and sometimes very serious, but yes, nice. Sophie considered this with her characteristic thoroughness. Can Charlie swim in the lake? I think so, yes. Then we should go. Charlie needs to experience nature. It's important for his development. His development. Dogs are descended from wolves, Dad. They need wilderness experiences to connect with their ancestral heritage. Where did you read that? Library book, Chapter 7. I took notes. The drive to Lake Wenatchee on Friday afternoon was equal parts scenic and chaotic. Charlie spent the entire 2-hour journey with his head out the window, tongue flapping in the wind, while Sophie narrated every interesting feature of the landscape and questioned Ethan extensively about lake ecology. Victoria had arrived earlier and was waiting on the cabin's front porch when they pulled up. She'd traded her usual professional attire for jeans and a fleece jacket, and her hair was down in a way that made her look younger and more relaxed than Ethan had ever seen her. You made it, she called, coming down to help with bags. And this must be the famous Charlie. Charlie, who'd never met a stranger, immediately approached Victoria with enthusiastic tail wagging and attempted to lick her face. Charlie, no, Sophie commanded. That's not appropriate greeting behavior. She turned to Victoria. I'm sorry, we're still working on manners. He's perfect, Victoria said, laughing as she scratched Charlie's ears. Absolutely perfect. The cabin was smaller than Ethan expected, cozy rather than luxurious, with wide windows overlooking the lake and a stone fireplace that dominated the living room. Sophie immediately claimed the bedroom with the best view and began unpacking her books with systematic efficiency. She's wonderful, Victoria said quietly, watching Sophie organize her temporary space. You can see Sarah in her, the way she approaches everything with such certainty. You never met Sarah? No. But I can see her in how you talk about her, and in Sophie's absolute conviction that the world can be understood if you just study it carefully enough. They spent the evening in comfortable domesticity, Victoria and Ethan making dinner while Sophie entertained Charlie, all of them eating together on the cabin's back deck as the sun set over the lake. The conversation flowed easily, moving between Sophie's enthusiastic explanations of dog psychology, Victoria's stories about learning to sail on this lake as a child, and Ethan's careful observations about how different the world looked when you stepped back from the machinery of daily survival. After Sophie went to bed, Charlie curled up beside her in immediate loyalty. Ethan and Victoria sat on the dock with glasses of wine, watching moonlight fracture across the water. "This is the first time I've been back in 8 years," Victoria said quietly. "I kept finding reasons not to come. Too busy, too far, too many memories of who I used to be. And now? Now I'm wondering why I stayed away so long." She drew her knees up, resting her chin on them. "I convinced myself that the person in that photograph was weak, that wanting simple things, peace, connection, time to just exist, was somehow incompatible with success. And I built an entire life around that belief. Was it worth it?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "Ask me that 3 months ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. Ask me now." She trailed off, looking out at the water. "Now I think I spent 8 years confusing loneliness with strength, mistaking isolation for independence." Ethan thought about his own journey, about the walls he'd built to protect Sophie and the ways those walls had started to feel more like prison than sanctuary. "I did something similar after Sarah died. Convinced myself that the only way to be a good father was to eliminate everything else. No risks, no complications, no life beyond the immediate routine of survival." "What changed?" "You asked me what I thought about a photograph, and suddenly I was part of something larger than just getting through the day." He smiled slightly. "Also, Sophie wanted a dog, and I realized I'd been using her as an excuse not to take any risks, when what she actually needed was to see that life could be bigger than I'd been making it." "She's lucky to have you." "I'm lucky to have her. She keeps me honest." They sat in companionable silence, the lake lapping gently at the dock pillars. In the cabin behind them, a light was still on in Sophie's room. She was undoubtedly reading to Charlie, continuing his education. "Can I ask you something personal?" Victoria said eventually. "Of course." "Are you happy? Not content? Not satisfied? Actually happy?" Ethan considered the question seriously. "I'm getting there. For the first time in 3 years, I feel like I'm moving towards something rather than just surviving. That's not the same as happy yet, but it feels like the beginning of it." "Good. You deserve that." Victoria stood and held out her hand. "Come on, there's something I want to show you." She led him down the dock to where a small rowboat was tied up. "I used to take this out at night as a teenager, drive my parents crazy because they thought I'd drown in the dark, but I loved it. The stillness, the stars, the feeling that the world was bigger and more beautiful than whatever problems seemed so urgent during the day." "Are you suggesting we take a rowboat out at night?" "I'm suggesting we choose joy even when it's slightly reckless." Victoria's smile was challenging. "Unless you'd rather play it safe." They rowed out to the middle of the lake, Victoria handling the oars with practiced ease while Ethan tried not to overthink the symbolism of literally being in the same boat with his boss. The water was glassy smooth, reflecting stars in patterns that seemed impossibly dense this far from the city's light pollution. "This is what I forgot," Victoria said, shipping the oars and letting them drift. "That there's a whole world that exists outside of quarterly reports and board meetings and the endless machinery of achievement. That sometimes the most important thing you can do is just stop and look at stars." "You're being remarkably philosophical for a CEO." "Maybe I'm remembering how to be a person who happens to also be a CEO. There's a difference." She lay back in the boat, looking up at the sky. "Thank you for pushing me to come back here. I needed this." Ethan lay back as well, their shoulders nearly touching in the small boat. Above them, the universe spread out in impossible vastness, beautiful and indifferent, and somehow comforting in its scale. I'm glad you invited us, he said quietly. This is good for Sophie. Good for me too. It's good for all of us. Human beings aren't meant to be alone. They floated in silence, two people who'd built walls around themselves for different reasons, now learning that those walls could come down. Not dramatically, not with grand declarations, but with the simple act of sharing space and honesty and the willingness to be seen. Eventually they rowed back, secured the boat, and returned to the cabin. Victoria paused at the door to her bedroom. Ethan, whatever this is, she gestured between them. I don't want to complicate things at work or put you in an awkward position or make Sophie uncomfortable or… Victoria. Yes? Stop overthinking it. We're friends spending a weekend at a lake. That's all it needs to be right now. She smiled, relieved. Friends. I can do friends. Good. Because I'm going to need a friend when Richard Thornton tries to undermine the wage equity review. He's absolutely going to try. I'll enjoy watching you handle it. Saturday was perfect in the way that simple days sometimes are. They hiked trails with Sophie leading the way and Charlie investigating every interesting smell. They had a picnic lunch by the water while Sophie read aloud from her dog books, and Victoria asked genuinely interested questions about canine psychology. They taught Charlie to fetch sticks from the lake, discovering that golden retrievers did indeed love water exactly as much as the research suggested. In the afternoon, while Sophie napped with Charlie, Ethan and Victoria sat on the porch and talked about DataCore, about the changes they were implementing, and the resistance they were facing and the long game of institutional transformation. I've been thinking about succession planning, Victoria said, surprising him with the topic. Not because I'm planning to leave, but because one of the things we've done wrong is concentrating too much power in too few hands. If something happened to me, the entire reform effort would collapse. So what's the solution? Distribute the authority. Build systems that don't depend on any single person maintaining them. She looked at him. Which means your role needs to evolve. Right now you report to me, which makes you vulnerable to whoever comes after me. We need to formalize institutional integrity as its own department with board oversight. That sounds like it would make me even more of a target. It would, but it would also make you harder to eliminate. Right now, the next CEO could dissolve your position on day one. If it's a board-mandated department, they can't touch it without formal approval. Victoria's expression was serious. I'm building this to last beyond my tenure. That requires thinking strategically about power structures. You really have thought about everything. I've had 8 years of thinking about nothing but work. I'm very thorough when I'm avoiding my personal life. That evening, Sophie insisted on making dinner, her specialty of grilled cheese sandwiches, which she prepared with the concentrated focus of a chef preparing a tasting menu. Victoria praised each sandwich effusively, and Sophie beamed with pride. After dinner, they built a fire in the fireplace, and Sophie asked Victoria questions about her job, her life, her opinions on various dog-related topics. Victoria answered each question with the kind of genuine attention that made Sophie glow with importance. Do you have any kids? Sophie asked eventually. No, I don't. Do you want kids? Sophie, Ethan intervened gently. That's a pretty personal question. It's okay, Victoria said. Honest question deserves an honest answer. She thought for a moment. I used to think I didn't. I was so focused on my career that I convinced myself I didn't want anything that would complicate it. But lately I've been wondering if I just told myself that because it was easier than admitting I was afraid I wouldn't be good at it. You'd be good at it, Sophie said with certainty. You're good at explaining things, and you're not afraid to be honest. Those are important parent qualities. How did you get so wise? Books, and my dad, and my mom before she died. Sophie snuggled closer to Charlie, who was sprawled across the couch like he'd always lived there. Mom used to say that being honest was the most important thing, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Victoria met Ethan's eyes over Sophie's head, and something passed between them, understanding, respect, and the beginning of something neither of them was quite ready to name. Sunday morning arrived too quickly, bringing with it the knowledge that they'd have to return to the real world and all its complications. They packed slowly, reluctant to leave the simplicity of the cabin for the machinery of their regular lives. On the drive back to Seattle, Sophie fell asleep in the back seat with Charlie, worn out from 2 days of hiking and swimming and general dog-related activity. Ethan drove while Victoria sat in the passenger seat, both of them quiet with their own thoughts. "This weekend," Victoria said eventually, "was the first time in 8 years I've felt like myself, the person I was before I decided that person wasn't enough. She was always enough. You just forgot for a while. Thank you for helping me remember." Victoria looked out the window at the passing landscape. "I know this is complicated. We work together. I'm your boss. There are power dynamics and professional boundaries and 100 reasons this could go badly. There are also reasons it could go well. We're both adults. We're both honest with each other. We both care about the same things." Ethan kept his eyes on the road. "I'm not saying we rush into anything. I'm just saying we don't have to pretend there's nothing here worth exploring." "What about Sophie?" "Sophie likes you. She also has excellent instincts about people. If she didn't think you were good for us, she would have said so. She's 7. She's 7 and wiser than most adults I know." Ethan glanced at her briefly. "Look, I'm not asking for anything more than what we already have: friendship, honesty, someone who understands what we're trying to build at DataCore and why it matters. If that evolves into something else, we'll figure it out. If it doesn't, we'll still have something valuable." Victoria nodded slowly. "Okay, friends who are figuring it out. I can work with that." The following Thursday's committee meeting felt different from all the previous ones. There was a sense of momentum, of real change beginning to take root. Robert reported that the HVAC repairs on floor 14 had been approved and scheduled. Jennifer had data showing a significant increase in harassment reports being taken seriously. Marcus announced that the accounting transparency audit had been completed and recommendations were being implemented. Keisha was smiling in a way Ethan hadn't seen before. Creative department workload is being redistributed. We're hiring 2 additional designers and a project manager. For the first time in 3 years, I don't feel like I'm drowning. "This is what success looks like," Victoria said. "Not perfection, not complete transformation, but real, measurable improvement in people's lives." "It's also what resistance looks like," Marcus added. 3 department heads have complained to the board about overreach. Richard Thornton is actively lobbying to have Ethan's authority limited. "Let him lobby," Victoria said calmly. "The board has seen the results. They know this is working." After the meeting, Ethan walked Victoria to her office. They'd developed this routine over the past few weeks, debriefing after meetings, discussing strategy, sometimes just talking about their days in the way friends did. "Richard's going to escalate," Ethan said. "You know that, right?" "I know. But he's also the VP most vulnerable to the hiring practice review. He can make noise, but he can't stop what we're doing without exposing his own problems." "You've become remarkably strategic about office politics." "I've always been strategic. I'm just using those skills for something better than protecting my own position." Victoria sat on the edge of her desk. "How's Sophie doing? Still teaching Charlie about his wolf ancestry?" "Currently teaching him to recognize different types of trees. She's created flashcards." "Of course she has." They talked for another 20 minutes about work and Sophie and Charlie and the comfortable minutiae of lives that were becoming increasingly intertwined. When Ethan finally left to pick up Sophie, he felt the warmth of connection that came from being genuinely known by another person. The opposition came to a head 3 weeks later when Richard Thornton submitted a formal complaint to the board, claiming that Ethan's investigations were creating a hostile work environment for executives and damaging departmental morale. The complaint was detailed, strategic, and designed to make Victoria choose between supporting Ethan or maintaining board confidence. The board called an emergency meeting. Victoria invited Ethan to attend. They sat together in the same conference room where Ethan had first presented his security findings, facing the same 12 board members who now had to decide whether the changes they'd approved were worth the institutional disruption they were causing. Richard presented his case with polished confidence, painting Ethan as an overreaching technician with a vendetta against successful executives. He presented anonymous complaints from sales staff about declining morale, suggested that the reforms were causing talent to leave, and argued that Victoria's support of Ethan represented poor judgment and emotional decision-making rather than sound leadership. When he finished, the silver-haired board member who'd questioned Ethan before turned to him. "Director Cole, response?" Ethan stood, feeling the weight of everything they'd built hanging in the balance. Mr. Thornton is correct that my investigations have made some executives uncomfortable. That was always going to be the case when we decided to hold people accountable for creating toxic work environments. He pulled up a presentation on the screen. But let's look at actual data rather than anonymous complaints. He walked through turnover rates, showing a 15% decrease in the departments where reforms had been implemented. He presented employee satisfaction scores, which had improved across the board. He showed cost savings from reduced recruitment and training expenses. He demonstrated that the company was becoming more efficient, more equitable, and more attractive to top talent. Mr. Thornton's department has the highest resistance to these changes. It also has the highest turnover, the most HR complaints, and the largest compensation disparities. The question isn't whether my work is creating discomfort. The question is whether we're willing to tolerate that discomfort in exchange for a company that actually lives up to its stated values. The board deliberated for 2 hours. When they emerged, the silver-haired executive delivered their decision. We're expanding Director Cole's authority and making the Institutional Integrity Department a permanent fixture with board oversight. We're also requiring all department heads to undergo comprehensive training on equitable management practices. He looked at Richard. Your department will be the first to participate. Any executive who refuses compliance will be asked to resign. Richard's face went white with fury, but he had no ground to stand on. The board had spoken. After the meeting, Victoria caught Ethan in the hallway. You just won a fight that could have destroyed everything we've built. We won it. Together. Together, she agreed. Then more quietly, I'm proud of you, not as your boss, as someone who cares about you and what you're building. The words hung between them, heavier with meaning than their simplicity suggested. Victoria, I know. We're figuring it out. I just wanted you to know. December arrived with early snow and the kind of crystalline cold that made Seattle feel like a different city entirely. Sophie was preparing for her school's winter concert, where she'd be performing a solo on the recorder that she practiced with relentless dedication, much to Charlie's confusion. The night of the concert, Ethan sat in the elementary school auditorium surrounded by other parents and wondered when his daughter had gotten old enough for solo performances. Sophie walked onto the stage with her recorder, saw Ethan in the audience, and smiled with the kind of pure confidence that came from knowing someone believed in her completely. She played beautifully. A simple melody made extraordinary by her 7-year-old certainty that music mattered and should be taken seriously. After the concert, as they walked to the car, Sophie said, I saw Victoria in the audience. She came to watch me play. Ethan stopped walking. What? Victoria. From the cabin. She was sitting in the back. She waved at me. Sure enough, Victoria was waiting by Ethan's car, looking slightly uncertain in a way that reminded him of their first meeting. I hope this isn't weird, she said. Sophie mentioned the concert during our last dinner, and I thought, I wanted to support her, if that's okay. It's more than okay, Ethan said quietly. Thank you for coming, Sophie beamed. Did you see me play? I only messed up once, and I covered it really well. You were magnificent, an absolute professional. We're going for ice cream to celebrate. Do you want to come? Victoria looked at Ethan, questioning. He nodded slightly. I would love to, Victoria said. They went to the same ice cream shop where Ethan and Sophie had celebrated countless small victories. Sophie got her usual mint chocolate chip, while Ethan got coffee, and Victoria surprised them both by ordering strawberry with hot fudge. I thought you'd be a vanilla person, Sophie observed. Why vanilla? Because you're very professional, and vanilla is a professional flavor. Victoria laughed. I like strawberries. They're sweet and a little unpredictable, like good surprises. They talked about the concert, about school, about Charlie's latest training achievements. And sitting there in the fluorescent glow of the ice cream shop, Ethan realized they looked like a family. Not perfectly, not without complications, but something that felt real and possible and worth nurturing. Later, after dropping Victoria at her car and getting Sophie ready for bed, Ethan found himself thinking about transformations. Not the dramatic kind from movies, but the slow accumulation of small choices that eventually added up to a completely different life. He'd chosen to tell the truth about a photograph, then to attend a Thursday meeting, then to accept a promotion that terrified him. then to get a dog and spend a weekend at a lake and show up at a school concert for a woman who'd become far more than just his boss. Each choice had felt small in the moment. Together, they'd rebuilt his entire world. "Dad?" Sophie called from her room. "Can Victoria come to Christmas?" Ethan walked to her doorway. "What?" "Christmas. It's in 3 weeks. Can Victoria come? She doesn't have any kids, and you said she doesn't have close friends, and everyone should have someone at Christmas." "That's very thoughtful of you, but Christmas is family time." "She feels like family, though, doesn't she?" Ethan sat on the edge of Sophie's bed, choosing his words carefully. "She does, but that's a big step, inviting someone to Christmas. I'd need to make sure she'd be comfortable with it." "You should ask her. I think she'd say yes. I think she wants to be part of our family." After Sophie fell asleep, Ethan sent Victoria a text. "Sophie wants to know if you'd like to come to Christmas dinner. No pressure, but apparently you feel like family, and everyone should have someone at Christmas." The response came quickly. "She said that?" Direct quote. There was a longer pause before the next message. "I would love to come to Christmas dinner, if you're sure." "I'm sure." Sophie's sure. Charlie's probably sure, but he hasn't weighed in officially. "Tell Charlie his opinion matters very much, and I'll bring him a special Christmas treat." Christmas Day was chaotic and perfect. Sophie woke up at 6 a.m. and immediately roused both Ethan and Charlie for present opening. Victoria arrived at noon with gifts carefully chosen: an advanced dog training book for Sophie, a ridiculous squeaky toy for Charlie, and for Ethan, a framed photograph of the three of them at the lake cabin, looking like the family they were becoming. They made dinner together, Victoria and Ethan working in comfortable synchronization while Sophie supervised and Charlie investigated every interesting smell. They ate too much, laughed at Sophie's jokes, and watched her teach Victoria the proper technique for playing fetch with Charlie. In the evening, after Sophie had fallen asleep with Charlie beside her and a new book about wolves clutched in her hands, Ethan and Victoria sat on the couch with glasses of wine and the comfortable exhaustion of a day well lived. "Thank you for inviting me," Victoria said quietly. "This is the first real Christmas I've had in 8 years. Thank you for being brave enough to come." Sophie was right. "I wanted to be part of your family. I've wanted that for a while now." Ethan set down his wine glass and turned to face her. "I need to be clear about something. If this, whatever this is between us, if it's going to be real, it has to include Sophie completely. Not just accepting that I have a daughter, but actually being part of her life, being someone she can count on. I know, and I want that. All of it." Victoria's eyes were steady, certain. "I'm not good at this. Relationships, vulnerability, letting people in. But I'm learning, and I want to learn with you." "We'll figure it out together. We're pretty good at that." They kissed then, finally, softly, with the kind of care that acknowledged this was the beginning of something important and worth protecting. When they pulled apart, Victoria was smiling. "I should probably go. It's late, and Sophie will have questions if I'm still here in the morning." "She'll have questions anyway. She's remarkably perceptive." "Then I should at least go so we can have those conversations at appropriate times." Victoria stood, then paused. "Ethan? I'm happy. Genuinely, surprisingly happy. Thank you for that. Thank you for asking me what I thought about a photograph. Everything good started from that question." After Victoria left, Ethan stood in his small living room and looked around at the life they'd built. Sophie's artwork on the walls, Charlie's toys scattered across the floor, dishes from Christmas dinner still waiting to be washed. The beautiful chaos of a life lived fully, rather than just survived. 3 months ago, he'd been invisible by choice. Now he was director of institutional integrity, implementing real change at a company that was slowly learning to value people over process. He had a daughter who was teaching a dog about wolf ancestry and a woman who'd remembered how to sit on a dock and do nothing. He had Thursday meetings with people who'd taken real risk to speak truth and were building something that would last beyond any individual's tenure. He had, against all odds and expectations, found his way back to living. The new year arrived with fresh snow and new challenges. Richard Thornton resigned rather than comply with the equity training, his departure creating ripples through the sales department that would take months to settle. The security implementation was completed on schedule and under budget. The HVAC on floor 14 was finally fixed, and Robert reported that morale in facilities had never been higher. Victoria continued her monthly trips to the lake cabin, and increasingly those trips included Ethan and Sophie. They became a ritual, escaping the machinery of Seattle for the stillness of water and trees and the simple pleasure of being together without the weight of professional obligations. Sophie thrived, her natural brilliance now channeled into projects she chose rather than just school requirements. She started a dog training business in their apartment complex, teaching other children proper techniques with the authority of a 7-year-old expert. Charlie became her willing demonstration subject, learning commands with patient dedication. And slowly, carefully, Ethan and Victoria built something neither of them had quite believed was possible. Not a fairy tale romance, but something better. A partnership based on honesty, respect, and the shared conviction that the world could be better if people just had the courage to fix what was broken. One Thursday evening in March, after their regular committee meeting had ended and the others had left, Victoria and Ethan stood on the 20th floor looking out at the city. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Victoria asked, "when I asked what you thought about the photograph?" "I said you looked real, not powerful. And I asked if you found power real, and you said you found it lonely." She turned to face him. "I'm not lonely anymore. For the first time in 8 years, I'm not lonely. Neither am I." Is this what happiness feels like, or contentment, or just the absence of that constant ache that I'd normalized for so long? I think it's all three. And I think it's worth everything we risked to get here. They stood together in the gathering dusk, watching Seattle's lights begin to glow against the darkening sky. Somewhere 17 floors below, people were finishing their workdays, heading home to families and friends and the private architecture of their own lives. The building that had once felt like a machine designed to grind people down was slowly transforming into something more humane, more honest, more aligned with the values it claimed to hold. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was better, and it was getting better still, and that was enough. Victoria reached for Ethan's hand, and he took it, and they stood together in comfortable silence while the city spread out below them in all its complicated, beautiful, perpetually unfinished glory. Two people who'd built walls around themselves for different reasons, now learning that the best things in life existed beyond those walls, waiting patiently for the courage to reach for them. Scary things were worth doing. Sophie had been right about that, as she was right about so many things. And sometimes the scariest thing of all was simply choosing to be seen, to be vulnerable, to acknowledge that you needed other people, and that needing them wasn't weakness but the most fundamental kind of strength. In Ethan's pocket, his phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. "Dad, Charlie learned a new trick and you're going to be so impressed. Come home soon so we can show you. Also, can Victoria come for dinner tomorrow? I want to teach her about wolf-pack dynamics. It's important." He showed the message to Victoria, who laughed with the kind of genuine joy that transformed her entire face. "Wolf-pack dynamics sound very important," she said. "I'd better come to dinner. Sophie's going to try to convince you that she's the alpha." "Sophie is absolutely the alpha. I accepted that weeks ago." They left the office together, Victoria locking the door behind them, both of them heading toward the lives they'd built that were messy and complicated, and infinitely better than the careful isolation they'd once mistaken for safety. The elevator descended, carrying them back to the world of dogs and homework and dinner conversations about canine psychology. Back to Thursday meetings and institutional reform and the slow, steady work of making broken systems whole. Back to each other and to Sophie and to the growing certainty that family wasn't just what you were born into, but what you built with intention and courage and the willingness to be honest even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. Outside, Seattle was doing what it always did. Existing in its perpetual state of becoming, neither quite the city it had been, nor fully the city it would be. And Ethan Cole, once invisible by choice, and now impossibly, terrifyingly visible, walked into the March evening with his hand in Victoria's and his phone showing a picture of his daughter teaching a golden retriever about wolves, and thought that maybe, just maybe, he'd finally figured out what it meant to truly live. Not perfectly. Not without fear or uncertainty or the occasional overwhelming conviction that he was still making it all up as he went along. But honestly, courageously, with people who saw him clearly and chose to stay anyway. And in the end, that was everything.